Chapter 1. Under the pitch-black sky, the continuous mountain range was like a crouching beast, quietly waiting for the break of dawn. At the foot of a small hill shaped like a crouching cow, there was a small village. "Li-er, get up and get to work." A yell broke the silence. A middle-aged woman with a bucket-like waist yelled at the cowshed. In a pile of hay in the cowshed, a skinny young man suddenly woke up from his dream. He thought blankly, "Where am I?" He had that dream again. In the dream, he lived in a city with tall buildings. He played with a magical artifact called a computer all day, and there were steel monsters running amok on the streets. Finally, one day, he was killed by a monster called BMW. Then he suddenly woke up. Yes, he had transmigrated. Over a dozen years had passed. He had almost treated the events of his past life as a dream. Looking around the dirty cowshed, he felt the itch from the mosquito bites. Clearly, this was not a good place. There was probably no other transmigrator in the world as miserable as him. Looking at the time, it had been about 15 years. His parents in this life were the most ordinary farmers in Crouching Ox Village. They passed away when he was young, and he was raised by an older brother. His brother was Li-de, so he was called Li-er. There were not many rules in the village. Many villagers did not have proper names in their lives. With the knowledge of his past life, he gave himself a name, Li Qingshan. There is no need to bury one's bones in the village. Life is full of green mountains. Even though he had transmigrated, he wanted to live well. No, he wanted to live better than he had in his past life. Only then would he not waste the second life that the heavens had given him. He remembered when he had just transmigrated. When he had calmed down from his fear and confusion, the great ambition of a transmigrator was ignited in his chest. However, he soon discovered that he was hungry and had no food to eat. His brother and sister-in-law only treated him as a burden. They threw all the dirty and tiring work to him, but the food he ate was always the worst. There was no familial love at all. He was young and had nowhere to go. He could only try to act like a child prodigy. However, he was thought to be possessed by a ghost. The witch in the village forced him to drink a lot of talisman water, so he did not dare to act rashly anymore. Therefore, the villagers still called him Li-er. Li Qingshan was just a joke. Li Qingshan's sister-in-law scolded him for a while. Seeing that he didn't respond, she rushed in, waved the bamboo stick in her hand, and mercilessly whipped him. "Lazy bones, still pretending to be dead, pretend to be dead." Li Qingshan was thinking about his past and present lives, his mind was in a mess. He suddenly stood up and snatched the bamboo stick, glaring at the peasant woman. Sister Li saw that the child from back then was now a head taller than her. Although she was afraid, her aura was not weak at all. "Li-er, I've raised you so hard and you still dare to be rude to me. When your brother wakes up, I'll let him teach you a lesson. If you don't work, then don't eat." She turned around and left. After Sister Li left, Li Qingshan threw down the bamboo stick and sighed heavily. He walked to the side of the trough and said to an old oxen, "Brother Ox, I've grown up and I don't want to live anymore. I just don't want to leave you." Before his parents died, they divided the family's property. The cottage and the fields were taken by his brother and sister-in-law. Now, the only property he had left was this oxen. Fortunately, he had this ox. He often went to the landlord's house to help, and he could still make a living. If he only ate vegetables at home, he didn't know how thin and weak he would become. Therefore, not only did he not treat it as an animal, but he also respectfully called it Brother Ox. The villagers all said that Li-er could live without Brother Li, but he couldn't live without Brother Ox. The oxen's fur was glossy, and it was plump and sturdy. It was possible to tell just how much effort Li Qingshan had put into taking care of it. However, it also seemed rather old, and one of its horns was missing. The cut was extremely smooth, as if it had been cut off by a sharp blade. The oxen opened its moist eyes and looked at Li Qingshan. As if it had understood him, it gathered its spirit and stood up. Li Qingshan mounted the ox with great familiarity, and the oxen slowly made its way towards the crouching ox hill. Riding on the oxen, Li Qingshan raised his head. The stars were extremely bright, a resplendence that did not exist in that world. He was like a regular cowherd, blowing into the clear flute. The sound of the flute reverberated through the morning mist. Behind him, the village was gradually waking up. On the crouching ox hill, the trees were sparse, and the grass was green. Using the light from the east, Li Qingshan gazed towards the west. The mountains stretched endlessly, and if he ventured deeper, he would reach the myriad great mountains. It was said that not only were there wolves, tigers, and leopards, but there were also mountain spirits and ghosts. Even hunters dared not venture too deeply. Li Qingshan had never seen a proper map in the village, nor did he understand the hydrology and geography of this world. All he knew was that the mountains and rivers were extremely lofty, while the rivers were extremely vast. Although it was filled with danger, there was always a great world waiting for him to wander through. Li Qingshan had already made up his mind to leave. In the end, he patted the back of the oxen. "Brother Ox, oh brother Ox, you're already so old. If I sell you, other people will definitely butcher you and eat you. The world is vast, so you should go. There are many wolves, tigers, and leopards in the mountains, so you have to be careful." At a time like this, the smartest thing to do was to sell oxen and gather some traveling expenses. That way, he would have some protection when he arrived in Qingyang City, just in case he starved to death on the streets. However, he refused to do that. Any farmer would laugh if they heard such a childish approach, but this was what he persisted with. "Since you call me big brother, how can I bear to leave you? Even if you can accompany me for a long time, there will still be a time when we part." Li Qingshan replied instinctively, but his voice gradually trailed off. He widened his eyes and stared at Oxen. All he felt was a chill run down his spine. He took a step back. "Demon." Oxen said, "Don't be afraid. I won't harm you." After all, they had known each other for so many years, so Li Qingshan was not too afraid. He was just unable to accept this surreal scene for a moment. However, when he thought about everything he had experienced, he calmed down. He frowned and asked in a probing manner, "Are you really Brother Ox?" Seeing how he had calmed down so quickly, Oxen nodded in approval. "You really do possess innate wisdom." "What innate wisdom?" Li Qingshan immediately raised his guard. He definitely did not want anyone to know about his identity as a transmigrator. He thought about how he could still put on an act in front of other people normally, but he was not as vigilant against Oxen. It must have seen all of his actions that did not match his identity and age. In the 6 realms of Sasra, there will occasionally be creatures who retain some memories of their past lives. This is known as innate wisdom. You and I both possess the memories of another identity. We're not regular farmers, Oxen. Being able to meet can be considered as fate. I see. Li Qingshan eased up slightly inside. He had heard about this before, but at least his identity as a transmigrator had not been exposed. "I never thought there really would be demons in this world, and I've even raised one for over a decade. Why didn't you say anything before?" "There's nothing to say. I won't ask where you come from, and you won't ask where I come from either. All you need to know is what I can give you." "Give me, what?" "Have you heard of supernatural powers?" Before Li Qingshan could ask, the Black Ox continued, "So-called abilities are the abilities of gods and demons that can penetrate the world. They can move mountains and fill seas, and they can pluck the stars and moon from the sky. If you want to live forever, you can live forever. If you want to live forever, you can live forever. If you want to live forever, you can live forever. Not to mention glory, splendor, wealth, money, and beauties, you can have them at your fingertips. Are you tempted?" The word, supernatural power, contained all the desires of all living beings. Li Qingshan was just one of them, so how could he not be tempted? But the deeper feeling was that it was unbelievable. It was like a person who had been blind for over a decade suddenly opened his eyes. Everything in front of him was so dazzling and full of unreality. Li Qingshan suppressed the excitement in his heart. "Brother Oxen, are you going to teach me that kind of supernatural power?" Oxen shook its head. "You're not qualified yet." It then changed the topic. "If you want to cultivate supernatural powers, you have to eat meat first." What? Li Qingshan wondered if he had heard wrongly. He felt that it was ridiculous. How could a supernatural power that could move mountains and fill seas, and pick the stars and moon be related to such an ordinary thing? The first step of cultivation is refining essence into qi. You have to refine the essence in your body into qi. With your sallow and emaciated appearance, how can you have essence to refine? Li Qingshan smiled bitterly. Anyone who grew up like him would not be able to become strong. And for a person who could not even lift a bucket of water, to talk about moving mountains and filling seas, wasn't it ridiculous? Dare I ask, where does meat come from? How could Li Qingshan not want to eat meat? Compared to the illusory elixirs, the taste of meat was truly engraved in his mind. It made him dream about it at night, and he still missed it. But how could a poor lad who could not even fill his stomach with coarse grains get delicious meat? He couldn't help but stare at the fat and strong body of Brother Oxen, subconsciously dividing it into tenderloin, T-bone, rib and many other parts in his mind, his eyes gleaming with greed. Oxen hit his head. "Don't even think about it." Then it raised its hoof and pointed to the 100,000 mountains in the west. "The meat is in there." Li Qingshan was surprised instead of delighted. Being a hunter in this world was not that easy. The jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards of the mountains were not to be trifled with. Moreover, the black ox was a living example right before him. As it seemed, the legends of the demons and monsters were not false. If he ran into any one of them, his life would basically be over. But Oxen only told him not to worry and asked him to wait at home. Then it disappeared without a trace. Li Qingshan made his way down the mountain alone. He struggled to calm down from the excitement in his heart. This world was actually so strange and colorful. If he could really become an immortal and travel through the mountains, it would not be a waste of the name he had given himself. When Li Qingshan returned home, his elder brother Li had already gone to the fields. Only his sister-in-law was leaning against the door and eating melon seeds. She rolled her eyes a few times when she saw him. Ordinary women and men who went out to work in the fields would either run the household chores or weave cloth to earn some money. But she was famous for being lazy in the village. She threw all the chores at home to Li Qingshan. She had never even touched a loom. Li Qingshan pretended not to see her. He stepped into the house and lifted the lid of the pot. There was not even any leftovers in the pot, let alone hot food and rice. Sister-in-law said in a strange tone, "We don't have rice to feed idle people. Why don't you take the ox and help Steward Lu?" She suddenly thought of something and asked, "Where is the ox?" Chapter 2. I lost it. Li Qingshan answered stiffly, as if he had been knocked back to the cruel reality from a fantasy world. "Hurry up and go look for it. If you dare to lose our family's cow, your brother will beat you to death when he comes back. If the cow is gone, you'd better get lost too." "That's my cow." Li Qingshan strode out of the door. If he didn't leave, he might not be able to stop himself from beating this woman up. However, if he really did that, he would no longer be able to stay at home. He would no longer be able to take shelter under the eaves of others. It wasn't until dusk that he returned to the cowshed, exhausted. His bright eyes looked around the empty cowshed, and then dimmed again. Apart from herding the cows and cleaning up, Li Qingshan's daily work was to bring the cows to the landlord's house in the village to help out and earn some money to supplement his family's expenses. Today, without the cow, he could only do the same work as the other long-term workers. Even adults would find it hard to do that kind of work, let alone a young man like him who hadn't even eaten breakfast. Compared to the exhaustion of his body, the insults and curses from the farm manager were nothing more than a trivial matter. He fell head first into the haystack and didn't want to think about anything else. However, his stomach started to growl again. It was conceivable that in such an environment, any interest would be worn down to the point where only the most basic physical needs were left. Li Qingshan was in a daze when he heard a bang. It was the sound of something heavy falling on the ground. He opened his eyes and saw a strange face with a pair of long white tusks. He couldn't help but jump in fright. When he woke up, he saw that it was a wild boar. It had just died, and it was still warm. Oxen was lying in front of the trough, smiling at him. He could already vaguely make out the expression on Oxen's face. Night fell. In the village house, Mrs. Li was complaining to Brother Li, "That little bastard is too inhumane. He even lost such a big cow. No, he must have secretly sold it. No, we must separate from the family. If we continue living like this, we will be in trouble." Elder Brother Li was in his 30s. He was tall and strong, and he was famous for being tyrannical in the village. However, he was extremely respectful towards his wife. But after we split up, those few acres of good land were given to him in front of the elders in the village. They used the reason that Li Qingshan was too young to farm as an excuse to occupy this piece of land. They didn't want to return it now, but if they officially separated from the family, they would have to return it. Hasn't Steward Lu always wanted this piece of land? We might as well sell it to them. If that little bastard has the guts, he can go ask him for it. But what if he doesn't want to? Starve him for 3 days, aren't you worried that he won't agree? While the two were discussing, Mrs. Li suddenly sniffed and said, "Do you smell something? It smells so good. It seems like someone's cooking meat." "It's not New Year's Day, why are they cooking meat?" It seems, it's nearby." The two followed the smell and came to the cowshed. They saw a pot in the cowshed with firewood burning under it. The soup in the pot was boiling, and a fragrant smell spread. The fire swayed in the darkness, casting Li Qingshan's shadow on the wall. Mrs. Li swallowed her saliva and said, "You little bastard, where did you steal the meat?" She was not only lazy but also greedy. Looking at the pot of meat soup, she even forgot that Li Qingshan had offended her. She went forward and picked up the spoon to stir it. However, Elder Brother Li's eyes were sharp. He saw what Li Qingshan was sitting on and exclaimed, "Wild boar." Wild boars could be said to be extremely dangerous in the mountains. Its skin was rough and thick, and it was difficult to be injured by swords. Ordinary hunters would retreat when they saw it, let alone capture it. When I was looking for a cow, I picked it up at the foot of the mountain. It was injured, probably because it was chased by hunters and had nowhere else to go. Li Qingshan made up an excuse. The existence of oxen must be kept a secret. Otherwise, if the news of the demon cow spread, who knew when the heavenly palace would come to find them? Elder Brother Li was skeptical, but he also laughed and said, "Brother, you are a fool with a fool's luck. When I bring this pig to the market, I can definitely sell it for a good price and save it for your wife." At the same time, he also saw the oxen in the cowshed. He thought that there was no need to rush to separate from him. The cow could still do some farm work. Li Qingshan watched as the sister-in-law stirred in the pot as if all she wanted to do was try a piece. His good mood from cooking the meat was immediately destroyed. With a smack, he smacked the sister-in-law's hand away. "Don't touch it." Sister-in-law Li covered her hand and stepped back. She wailed, "Look at your brother. I told you that he bullied a woman when you weren't at home. You didn't believe me. Now he's doing it in front of you." "Bullied you?" Li Qingshan only felt a wave of nausea. "If your surname was Pan, I wouldn't have suffered a loss." Elder Brother Li's face suddenly became gloomy. "Is this how you act as an uncle?" Li Qingshan lowered his head and said, "I have my own plans for this meat. I am not young anymore. It is time for us to separate." This was something he had been thinking about when he was cooking the meat. He was no longer willing to bow his head under the eaves of this house. Elder brother Li did not expect that before he could say anything, Li Qingshan would bring it up first. He was stunned for a moment and then became angry. He was a stupid farmer and could not hold back his anger. He clenched his fists and stepped forward, wanting to beat up Li Qingshan and drag this wild boar away first. Li Qingshan saw that elder brother Li's momentum was not right. He also stood up. His face was grim, but his heart felt a little weak. His bones were not fully grown yet. He had been tired for a day and had not eaten anything. How could he fight against a grown man? He glanced at Oxen from the corner of his eyes, but Oxen only watched this scene as if it was watching a show. It had no intention of helping. Just as Li Qingshan was groaning in his heart and preparing to receive a beating, elder brother Li stopped in his tracks and looked at Li Qingshan's right hand. In that rough hand was a short knife that was equally rough. The blade was full of impurities. Even though it had been carefully polished, it was still dull and lusterless. This was a short knife that Li Qingshan had bought from the bazaar after living frugally all these years. It was useful in many places. Just now, he was using this knife to cut meat. Li Qingshan immediately understood that his elder brother was afraid. He was not afraid of himself, but of this knife. And before this moment, he had never realized that the shoddy knife in his hand had the power to deter others. In his previous life, Li Qingshan was only an ordinary student. Although he had fought a few times, it was just disputes between fellow students. In both of his lives, he had never had the experience of facing a weapon. Understanding this, Li Qingshan clenched the knife in his hand and deliberately raised it up, like a wild beast showing off its fangs, even though he did not dare to use it. Elder brother Li immediately took a step back, and Mrs. Li also did not dare to howl. In the end, the two of them actually retreated from the cowshed with extremely disappointed expressions. They cursed outside for a while before returning to their room to discuss their grand plan. However, Li Qingshan turned a deaf ear to it. He even tossed the fragrance of the meat to the back of his mind. All he did was stare at the dagger blankly. His face was vaguely reflected in the dagger. This cheap item of a few taels of silver had just protected him, preventing him from physical pain and humiliation. Moreover, it had protected his spoils of battle. Although this was a matter of course, at this moment, it was as if he had suddenly become enlightened. Oxen was lying in front of the trough, smiling at him. The flames flickered, and the black giant stood on the wall with the knife in his hand. At this moment, a young man understood the exact value of strength. After a long time, Li Qingshan sat down again, scratching his ears and cheeks as he looked at the pot. How much longer will this meat need to cook? He had always been a person who could not live without meat. These past 10 years had been really bitter for him. When his parents were still alive, he could still eat a few mouthfuls of meat during festivals. But after his parents passed away, the meat they cut was not even enough for Mrs. Li. At this moment, even if there was a bottle of immortal pills in front of him, it would not make him as anxious as this pot of meat. The pig was a big pig, and this pot of meat had been cooking for half the night. The rising flames, the drifting aroma, the crackling sounds, and the focused young man formed a scene that was neither romantic nor poetic, but extremely simple and primitive. In the end, although there was not even a bit of salt, not to mention other spices, it made Li Qingshan eat so much that he almost swallowed his tongue. Regardless of fat or lean, several kilograms of cooked meat entered his stomach, and in the end, even the broth was completely drunk. At this moment, if someone asked Li Qingshan what happiness was, he would definitely say that happiness was a pot of meat. Chapter 3. Li Qingshan laid down on the pile of hay in satisfaction. He stretched out his limbs and fell asleep before he knew it. That night, he did not dream of his past life again. In the hut near the cowshed, the elder Li and his wife tossed and turned restlessly due to the smell of meat. They only fell asleep in the middle of the night as well. The next morning, right after the rooster crowed 3 times, a short, plump man in emerald green silk robes arrived at the fields. He was none other than the largest landlord in the tiny Crouching Ox village, Old Master Lu, who was also the caretaker Lu that the elder Li's wife mentioned. Because he had once served as a caretaker for a large clan in the city, he received the blessing of the clan when he grew old, allowing him to return to his hometown in glory. However, he still wanted to be referred to as Caretaker Lu so that he could display his completely different status from these bumpkins and distinguish himself from regular bumpkin landlords. And because most of the land in the village had been annexed by him through various methods, he gained the elegant name of Half-Village Lu. If Half-Village Lu had any ambitions, it would obviously be to become Lu Chuansuan. However, he could not rush this. Using the words he had heard from the mister in the city, it was to take it slow. He believed he would definitely be able to fulfill this wish within his lifetime. By then, everyone in the village would be his workers, and he would be the local tyrant of the village. He could do whatever he wanted. However, Caretaker Lu was rather displeased right now. He saw that there were not a lot of workers working on his land. He waved his plump hand. Why are there only a few people? Where are the others? A worker smiled along. Caretaker Lu, they've all gone to help Li Er build a house. Li Er? Which Li Er? That cowherd. Of course I know. Where did he get the money from? That kid got lucky. He picked up a huge wild boar for free. As long as anyone in the village is willing to help him build a house, they'll be given a large piece of pork. It's right below the Crouching Ox Hill. It's very popular right now. Then why aren't you going? I've fallen out with him, the worker said awkwardly. He was extremely reluctant. That was meat. How could he eat it normally? Caretaker Lu fiddled with his mustache. Let's go and have a look too. As soon as he woke up, Li Qingshan began to work on the separation of the family. The most important thing was to build a decent house for himself. He couldn't live under someone else's roof anymore. In the past, he did not have such an ability, but with this big wild boar, many things were easily solved. With a slight call, many people came to help, and he could say that he had seen the magic of pork in this world. The scenery below the Crouching Ox Hill was picturesque. If this were his past life, a place like this would either be a tourist attraction or a residential area for wealthy people. Why would he have the right to occupy it? Moreover, this place was far away from the village, so it was convenient for him to keep secrets. He could communicate with oxen without worry. Li Qingshan stood among the crowd and gave out commands. He was in an indescribably good mood, and he somewhat understood what oxen meant by eating meat. It wasn't just to strengthen one's body. If it was a person without food and clothing, he would spend all day in order to fill his stomach. How would he have the mood to do other things, let alone see his true nature? Caretaker Lu stood in the distance and glanced over. He muttered to himself, in other words, the brothers are going to split up. However, he just happened to see the eldest Li couple watching from afar as well. Not only were they unhappy when they saw their brother move to a new house, but they even ground their teeth in resentment. As a result, he came up with a plan and walked over with a smile. In less than a dozen days, a new house was completed. Everyone collected their pork and dispersed. Li Qingshan gazed at his new residence in satisfaction. It was just a regular mud house with a thatch covering it. He stood in a small courtyard surrounded by a fence. But this was his new home. It was the first step for him to settle down in this world. Over the past few days, he had been eating meat every day, so his complexion had recovered a healthy glow. He had gained some confidence as he stood there. Although it had only been around a dozen days, he seemed to have grown a few inches out of nowhere. Just as Li Qingshan was feeling happy, an old woman with white hair and wrinkled skin walked into the courtyard. She seemed to be startled. Li Erlang, your house is not well built. It's very ominous. Li Qingshan frowned. This was the witch who gave him the water talisman when he was young. All day long, she played tricks and fooled these ignorant and backward villagers. He never had a good impression of her. However, she had great prestige in the village. If there were any weddings or funerals in the village, they would ask her for divination. Of course, during the divination, there was no lack of offerings to worship the gods. Li Qingshan did not dare to be negligent. He bowed and said, "Why are you here?" The witch did not even look at him. She looked around the house and said, "There's Yin Qi and evil spirits here. Luckily, I'm prepared." She held a jar in one hand and a willow branch in the other. She dipped the willow branch into the water in the jar and sprinkled it around the house and yard. She shouted, "Go, go." Li Qingshan could not stop her. He could only let her do whatever she wanted. Although he already believed in ghosts and gods, he did not believe that there was any Yin Qi or evil spirits here. There was a real monster following him. If there was really something wrong, Oxen would naturally tell him. It would not be her turn. After the witch sprinkled the water, she seemed to have done Li Qingshan a great favor. She nagged a lot more. It was nothing more than that Li Qingshan could only have this luck because of the god's gift. Now it was time to return the god's gift. The best thing to worship the god was naturally the big pig head left behind by the wild boar. Li Qingshan finally understood why she came. He said, "I'm afraid it's not the god who wants to eat it. It's you who wants to eat it, right?" Faced with Li Qingshan's little rudeness, the witch flew into a rage. She straightened her body and said in a different voice, "Li Qingshan, if you don't listen to my advice, there will be a disaster." Li Qingshan knew that this was the witch's trick of inviting the god to possess her. If an ordinary villager saw this trick, they would be scared pale and kneel down to kowtow. Even the original Li Qingshan did not dare to completely ignore it. But now was different from the past. He crossed his arms as if he was watching a joke. He said, "There is no door to fortune or disaster. Only people can bring it on themselves. What does it have to do with the god? Please." Seeing that this trick did not work, the witch returned to her original state and said gloomily, "Just you wait." Not long after the witch left, the disaster really did come. A villager came to invite Li Qingshan to the ancestral hall. Although the village was small, there were many rules. The separation of the family from his brother should have been done in the ancestral hall in front of the village elders. However, he should have been the one to bring it up first. Did his brother beat him to it? Li Qingshan felt rather uneasy, but Oxen was nowhere to be seen, so he could only brace himself. The so-called ancestral hall was just a small house with a very deep doorway, but it was a rare brick building in the village. Inside, the ancestral tablets of the ancestors of the Li and Lu families were enshrined. In the pitch-black house, a few old people stood to the left and right. At the very front was the village head of Crouching Ox Village. He was in his 60s and had a crooked back. He was also a member of the Li family. According to seniority, Li Qingshan had to call him grandfather. The Li couple were already waiting there. As soon as they saw Li Qingshan, they glared at him viciously, as if Li Qingshan had harmed them somehow. There was a hint of delight from revenge in their gazes. Li Qingshan ignored them. He only bowed to the old people before beginning the separation under the village head's supervision. Originally, Li Qingshan thought that all he would get was oxen and a few acres of farmland. He never thought it would actually be much more complicated than he had imagined. The village head was stern and impartial. He gave many miscellaneous items to Li Qingshan, such as a spoon and a pair of chopsticks. With each item, the sister-in-law's heart would twitch painfully. Her gaze towards Li Qingshan became more and more vicious. Li Qingshan remained unfazed. He remained composed. Moreover, the miscellaneous items were all useful, so he did not have to buy them all again. After a whole hour, the village head stopped just now. He looked around with his murky eyes. "Do you have any objections?" The Li couple accepted it, but Li Qingshan felt that something was off. "Grandfather, what about those acres of farmland? What farmland? Li Qingshan was stunned. When his father and mother passed away in the past, they had said it clearly in front of this person. They were afraid that his elder brother would bully him, so they wanted this esteemed old man of the village to uphold justice for him. The sister-in-law had already spoken, "You're still young and ignorant. Those two old things didn't return the money they borrowed. They've already paid them back." Li Qingshan flew into a rage. "What did you call my father and mother? Say that again." Although he did not have any particularly deep feelings for them, they were still his birth parents in this life. How could he allow someone to humiliate them in public? Brother Li had already stood in front of the sister-in-law. A few men also walked in from outside the ancestral hall. It was obvious that they were prepared. Li Qingshan also noticed that these people were all scoundrels and scoundrels from the village. Normally, all they did was steal from others and bully others. They did not care about the camaraderie of fellow villagers at all. They would never show mercy when they laid their hands on them. The village head secretly cursed the stupid woman and sighed, "I've already checked the receipt." "Where is the receipt?" Brother Li replied, "We've already burned it when we got it." "May I know who he owes money to?" The sister-in-law proudly said, "The village's steward Lu. If you have the guts, go and ask for it. See if Steward Lu doesn't skin you alive." "What's the matter?" "I'm just bullying an ungrateful little bastard like you." Those acres of farmland were all fertile farmland. They were sold for some money. It could be considered as making up for not being able to eat pork. She made up her mind that once she got home, she would buy a chicken to eat. Li Qingshan was so angry that his whole body trembled. His nails pierced into his palms. Based on his 2 lives' worth of experience, how could he not know the inside story? Farmers regarded the land as their lifeblood, how could they casually compensate other people? His parents also dug in the soil for food all their lives, how could they possibly borrow money from other people? This was clearly an alliance to bully him. After losing the land, if he wanted to eat and live, he could only go to Steward Lu's farm and work as a long-term worker. Even if he was angry, he would have to endure it. What a good plan. At home, Li Qingshan was treated coldly by his brother and sister-in-law. It was only because of his poor food and clothing. He could still accept it. However, it was different to distort the truth like this. In his previous life, he mingled on the internet. He thought that he had seen all the dark sides of society and was angry because of it. However, when this kind of thing happened to him, he found it hard to bear. If he agreed, it would mean that he accepted the village's distribution. He would not have a chance to appeal. __________. Chapter 4. The atmosphere in the ancestral hall froze for a moment. The village head's face sank. "What, Li Erlang, are you dissatisfied with my arrangements?" The ruffians and scoundrels had already begun to rub their palms together. The favous-headed man in the lead even held a chopping knife in his hand. The other elders either closed their eyes or tried to persuade him, "Waiter, don't be angry. You can't win against him. Caretaker Lu allowed you to work in the estate. He'll pay you more. Why don't you have food to eat?" Li Qingshan gave a muffled reply. He left the ancestral hall by some unknown means. When he left, he even tripped over the favous-headed man and almost fell, leaving behind a wave of laughter. He came across the witch along the way, and she smiled complacently. "Disaster, disaster. If you worship the god now, it's still not too late." Li Qingshan returned to his new residence below Crouching Ox Hill and laid down. He no longer felt any joy at all. The sun set in the west, and the sky darkened. The crowing of chickens and barking of dogs gradually died down, and the village recovered its peace. Oxen strolled in from outside. Li Qingshan propped himself up. Just when he was about to speak, Oxen said, "I saw everything, but I didn't help you. I didn't want your help. I don't care about those fields either. You can't accept this. Yes. There are plenty of things in the world where black and white are indistinguishable and right and wrong are inverted. Let alone a mere mortal like you, even immortals, Buddhas, and saints with extraordinary powers have times when they feel wronged and humiliated. What's a little bit of pettiness like yours? Li Qingshan shot a glance at him. But I don't want to accept it. Suddenly, he thought of the dagger again. Oxen stared at him silently for quite a while before suddenly laughing aloud. All right, all right, all right. As long as you don't want to accept it. When a man goes about his business, he is quick to repay kindness and vengeance. The kindness of a single meal must be repaid, and the hatred of a single grudge must be avenged. Originally, I thought your willpower had been worn down over the years, but you actually still have some manliness in you. Only like that can you be worthy of my guidance. Li Qingshan was taken aback. You're testing me. The green ox sniffed and said, this is considered a test. I'm just asking which path you want to take. Which path? Li Qingshan did not understand. There are thousands of ways in the world. There are ways to swallow one's anger and protect one's own life, and there are also ways to rise with a sword and die for a noble cause. Humans have the human path, demons have the demon path, gods have the divine path, and ghosts have the ghost path. Each path has its own glory, and each path has its own choice. Li Qingshan felt dizzy as he listened to it, Dao, non-stop. Are you going to sing a song, Dao, 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 for me? At the end of the conversation, he interrupted, I will seek my own path. Oxen was startled at first, then delighted. You actually understood. That's right, there are thousands of great Daos. I will seek my own Dao. Li Qingshan took out a big gourd out of nowhere, and the gourd flew into his hand by itself. Since you refuse to swallow your anger, I'll teach you a way that doesn't require you to swallow your anger. Li Qingshan felt something heavy in his hand, as if there was some kind of liquid swaying in it. He opened the bottle and a strong smell of alcohol assaulted him. Li Qingshan smiled bitterly. After eating meat, he would drink wine. It seemed reasonable, but who would rely on these two things to cultivate? If eating meat and drinking wine could help one become an immortal, then all the rich people in the world would become immortals. Could it be that immortals were all good-for-nothings? Oxen only said 8 words, meat strengthens the body, and wine strengthens the liver and gallbladder. Li Qingshan clenched his teeth, raised his head, and gulped down the wine. Although it was only the village's unrefined wine, he still felt dizzy after drinking the gourd. He stared blankly at Oxen. Could it be that it wanted him to drown his sorrows in wine? Go kill someone, and I'll teach you cultivation. Oxen said in an extremely calm tone, as if it was talking about something insignificant. Then, it lay down. Li Qingshan felt a chill run down his spine. He suddenly realized that the thing in front of him wasn't a hard-working old bull that had been plowing the fields with him for more than 10 years, but a real bull spirit. What it taught him was not the peaceful Tao of immortals and Buddhas, but the fierce and domineering Tao of demons. It hadn't taught him any cultivation techniques, it only taught him to eat meat, drink wine, and now, kill people. Was he really going to kill people? Faces appeared in front of him. He hated these people, and he wanted nothing more than to kill them, but he knew that he didn't dare to do so. Oxen also saw through this, which was why he wanted to drink wine to strengthen his courage. Was this a proof of allegiance, or a gift to become his disciple? Thinking back to what happened today, the drunkenness and anger rose. Li Qingshan raised his head, took a deep breath, and lowered his head. Kill who? That's your problem. I'll say it first, I won't help you, and I won't save you. I'm just an ordinary bull. Tonight, the moon was bright, sprinkling a layer of white frost on the ground. Li Qingshan walked alone on the white frost. He felt that the full moon above his head was so dazzling that he wished for a dark cloud to cover it up. The village was silent. Li Qingshan's footsteps swayed as he walked around the village, his heart was at a loss. He came to the front of a rundown house, and there was a hubbub coming from inside. Li Qingshan heard it clearly. It was the ruffians from the ancestral hall today. He hurriedly squatted down against the wall and listened to what they were saying. Today's wine came so easily. I just stood in the ancestral hall, and Steward Lu gave me so much. Li Qingshan recognized the voice at once. It was patch-haired Lu, a famous ruffian in the village. He spent his days idling around and stealing things. He was surly and fierce, and he often carried a chopping knife with him. The villagers were afraid of him, and even if they caught him stealing, they didn't dare to do anything to him. The other ruffians also treated him as their leader. This is all because of you, big brother. Didn't you see that kid's face? He was so scared that it turned pale. The room roared with laughter. Li Qingshan didn't know what his face was like at the time, but it was definitely red now. His drunkenness mixed with anger rushed to his head. It's a pity that the coward didn't make a move. I haven't exercised my fists and legs in a long time. I was going to use him to practice, but that bastard never took me seriously. Li Qingshan had lived 2 lives, but he wasn't as afraid of him as the ordinary villagers. He didn't expect to attract such hostility. Isn't it easy for Big Brother to beat him up? That idiot built his house outside the village. Wouldn't it be easy for us to beat him up? We can also take his cow and sell it at the market. We can even exchange it for a few drinks. The other ruffians agreed one after another. Li Qingshan let out a breath that reeked of alcohol and tightened his grip on the short knife in his arms. Patch-haired Lu drank a bellyful of alcohol and went outside the house to pee. He didn't return to the house, but walked along the small path to the south of the village. Li Qingshan felt strange and immediately followed him. He saw that patch-haired Lu came to the door of the famous widow Lu in the village and shouted for her to open the door. Only then did he know what he wanted to do. The door was tightly shut, and the lights in the house were not turned on. It was obvious that they were afraid of him. There were a few thatched cottages not far away, but no one paid any attention to them. Patch-haired Lu took advantage of his drunkenness and said a lot of obscenities. He kicked the door hard and cursed for a while, causing the dogs in the village to bark loudly. Then he turned around and left. Inside the door, Widow Lu calmed down a little. She peeked outside through the crack in the door and saw that patch-haired Lu had indeed gone far away. Only then did she relax. Suddenly, her eyes flashed and she saw a figure following behind patch-haired Lu. The night was dark, so she couldn't see the figure's clothes and appearance clearly. She thought it was his attendant, and she faintly felt that something was wrong. Li Qingshan followed patch-haired Lu to a desolate place. He made up his mind, shouted, and pounced on him. Patch-haired Lu turned around in shock and saw a dull short knife stabbing at him. He immediately sobered up and wanted to run away to resist, but his hands and feet were weak. He usually only used a knife to scare the common people and fought in a few group fights. He had never experienced a real life-and-death fight. Although the other party was only a youth, his decisiveness and murderous aura made him look like a fierce beast in the mountains. Without any obstruction, the knife entered his body. Li Qingshan didn't expect that the usually arrogant patch-haired Lu would be so weak. Looking at the frightened and pleading look on patch-haired Lu's face, he seemed to be even more drunk. His eyes faintly glowed red, and his brain seemed to stop working. Only his hands kept moving. The blade and blood-red light danced about in the darkness. By the time Li Qingshan had calmed down, patch-haired Lu had already collapsed in a pool of blood. He was as dead as he could be. The heavy smell of blood also gave off a chilly smell in the moonlit night. Li Qingshan forcefully composed himself and turned around to leave. He rushed to the stream below Crouching Ox Hill in a single breath. Just now, he stopped. Illuminated by the water, he could not help but leap in fright. Is this still me? The water reflected a bloodied youth. He pursed his lips and widened his eyes, still radiating with killing intent that had yet to disperse. It was extremely terrifying. Li Qingshan cupped the icy cold stream water and washed away the blood on his body. Only then did he return to the hut. He ignored Oxen who lay beside him and collapsed on the bed. Only now did his hands begin to tremble, and he suddenly became covered in cold sweat, drenching his clothes. He had completely sobered up. Oxen asked with a smile, "Aren't you going to run?" It was as if it was not the one who had told Li Qingshan to kill people. Li Qingshan said, "Do I still need to run if I'm going to kill something like that?" He had not chosen patch-haired Lu out of a moment of impulse. This bastard was utterly wicked in the village. No one would stand up for him, and if the people did not report him, the officials would not investigate him. As long as he did not leave behind any overly obvious evidence, the death of someone like him would probably end up unresolved. The praise in Oxen's eyes deepened. It was very easy to find an ignorant person who would kill in a fit of rage, but it was very difficult to know who to kill and who not to kill, as well as how to protect oneself while killing. Even if the composure before him was an act, it was enough to demonstrate his willpower. Li Qingshan's trembling hands could not fool it, but in its eyes, not only were there no shame in killing people, but there were also people who were vicious and looked down on killing people everywhere. However, it was truly impressive that he could suppress his nervousness and fear until now to erupt. After quite a while, Oxen asked, "How do you feel?" "So scary. So satisfying." These were Li Qingshan's heartfelt words. After the fear, he actually felt an indescribable sense of contentment. Most of the pent-up anger in his chest had dissipated. He recalled the feeling when he watched Water Margin, Instructor Lin at the Wind Snow Mountain Holy Temple, and Wu Erlang's blood splattered on the lover's brothel. Oxen chuckled. "Go to sleep. There are many things to do tomorrow." Li Qingshan's heart skipped a beat, and he revealed a joyful expression. "You mean?" Chapter 5. Oxen didn't reply and closed his eyes. Li Qingshan lay flat on his bed. Although his face remained calm, his heart was surging uncontrollably. He didn't fall asleep even when it was late at night. But once the taut string in his heart relaxed, he felt even more tired than after a day of farm work, so he immediately fell asleep. That night, he dreamed that he was enemies with millions of people. He killed until a mountain of corpses covered the sun and a sea of blood and stars sank. When he woke up, the dream faded like the tide. The sun shone brightly in the room and it was already high in the sky. Patch-haired Lu's death was like a drop of cold water in a pot of boiling oil. It set off a huge uproar in the village. This fellow had done all kinds of evil in the village. Now that he was finally dead, the ordinary villagers all clapped their hands and cheered, saying that it was retribution. But then they guessed who did it. Although there were many people who had grudges against patch-haired Lu, there weren't many who dared to take revenge. There were no secrets in a small village. The villagers thought about it and thought about what happened in the ancestral hall yesterday. But that person didn't come to see the big show, which confirmed their guess. Li Erlang killed someone. He usually doesn't make a sound, but he actually has such courage. I'm afraid he's already escaped. Amidst the quiet discussion, the faces of the eldest Li couple were deathly pale. Steward Lu and village chief Li's faces were as dark as water. The ruffians were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. If they had gone out last night, would they be lying here right now? Someone cried out in surprise, "Li Erlang is here." The crowd automatically opened up a path. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Li Qingshan walked with large strides to the side of patch-haired Lu's corpse. He didn't feel it last night because of the dusky sky, but today he also felt that the death was horrifying. But he didn't show it on his face. He only said, "It's good that he died." His gaze swept across the crowd from left to right. Everyone felt that in one night, Li Qingshan seemed to have changed into a different person. He became somewhat frightening. Everyone who was looked at by him felt a chill run down their backs. And those who were directly involved were even more frightened. Village Chief Li said, "Tie up Li Er and send him to the ancestral hall." Crouching Ox Village was just too remote. It was basically an autonomous village. If there was anything, the elders in the village would discuss and resolve it. Even if it was a murder case, they would have to capture the person first and send him to the government. It was impossible to count on the bosses of the government to travel several dozen kilometers to a place like this to capture the person. Therefore, they basically didn't have any dealings with the yamen, and directly carried out private executions in the village. The villagers were in an uproar. Li Qingshan raised his eyebrows and shouted, "Who dares?" Even though he did not have a weapon in his hand, his murderous aura was like an unsheathed sword, showing off its edge. None of the villagers stepped forward, not only because they were afraid of Li Qingshan. There was a scale in everyone's heart, and the villagers' thinking was even more simple. "Village chief, you colluded with the tyrants and bullied the kind, what right do you have to order us?" The villagers also watched Erlang grow up, and he even called you grandpa. You really have the heart to do this. This patch-haired Lu deserved to die. Erlang did this to rid the people of evil. Patch-haired Lu got drunk and fell to his death. What does this have to do with Erlang? The one who spoke was Zhang Wuge, who had a great grudge against Patch-haired Lu. Patch-haired Lu had once tried to bully his wife when he was working in the fields. Back then, he was tempted to fight it out with this bastard, but his wife had bitterly persuaded him not to. Now that he saw his corpse lying on the ground, he felt indescribably carefree. Someone immediately echoed, yeah, he fell to his death. This is all retribution from the heavens. For a moment, there was a hubbub of voices. They all said Patch-haired Lu died in an accident. They completely ignored the holes in Patch-haired Lu's body on the ground. When they looked at Li Qingshan, their gazes became a little more respectful. Li Qingshan suddenly became rather moved. This was the so-called public opinion. Village Chief Li knew that if this continued, his authority in the village would definitely be greatly affected. Furthermore, he really was rather afraid of Li Qingshan's revenge. If he had known that this kid was so vicious, he definitely would not have twisted his mouth over some silver. The villagers didn't listen to his commands. Those ruffians were even worse than ordinary people, so they had already sneaked away. He could only take a look at Steward Lu. He should be able to command the servants and workers in the family, but Steward Lu pretended not to see them. In any case, it was Big Li who insisted on selling the land to him, and he didn't show up. His family was big, so why should he go head-on with such a strong person over such a trivial matter? Moreover, if he was not careful, he would incite the anger of the people. Unknowingly, he had already treated Li Qingshan as a strong person. Possessed by a demon, possessed by a demon. I told you. Which suddenly pointed at Li Qingshan and howled. The villagers' expressions changed greatly. They couldn't help but move a little further away from Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan stepped forward and kicked her down. You old hag, how long are you going to falsely accuse me? If you dare to say another word, I'll tear your mouth apart. Which let out an "I-O" and didn't dare to say anything. She only stared at him with a venomous gaze. Li Qingshan was unafraid. If you really have supernatural powers, then let your ghosts come and find me. Let's see if I'm afraid or not. After saying this, he walked out of the crowd with his head held high. He walked to a place where there was no one around. Just now, his aura had been released. He felt his heart beating violently, but he knew that he had made the right move. If he hid in his house out of fear and gave village head Li time to mobilize the villagers, someone would come to arrest him before nightfall. With his current physique, could he really fight against 3 to 5 burly men? Only by taking a risky move, suppressing the others with his aura and obtaining justice, could he truly be safe and sound. When he returned to the thatched cottage, oxen had already been waiting for a long time. He looked up and down at Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan also noticed the strange atmosphere. He went forward and bowed respectfully. He raised his head and asked with a smile, Brother Ox, do you still need to hold a banquet to formally acknowledge me as your master? Oxen said, which of your wine and meat wasn't brought by me? What banquet to formally acknowledge me as your master? Li Qingshan spread his arms and said, I'll help you gather some tender grass, all right? Oxen's eyes darkened. Stop joking around. Since you have the intention to kill, that's why I taught you the art of killing. In the future, you'll inevitably have to fight with others. You won't have a single day of peace. If your cultivation isn't enough and you get killed, you'll have no regrets. The weak are prey to the strong. It doesn't matter where I go. I don't dare to say that I have no regrets, that's all. Oxen said, no regrets. Since you've made up your mind, I'll teach you the ox demon's fist of great strength. When you've cultivated the strength of a bull and laid down your foundation, I'll teach you the tiger demon's fist of bone training. With these two skills, you'll be able to practice the supernatural power of Taoism, the strength of 9 bulls and 2 tigers. By then, you'll be able to do whatever you want in the world. The strength of 9 bulls and 2 tigers. When Li Qingshan first heard about it, he found it quite ordinary. What was so special about 9 oxen and 2 tigers? They were just the most ordinary of livestock and wild beasts. Were they really worthy of being called supernatural abilities? Could they run amok in the world? But when he thought about it carefully, he was shocked. He had been herding bulls for more than 10 years and knew how strong a bull was. A bull's strength was equivalent to 10 strong men. As long as one could obtain the strength of 1 bull, they would be able to wear armor and fight on the battlefield. They would be worthy of the title of a fierce general. There was nothing special about 9 bulls and 2 tigers, but if all these strengths were gathered on one person, he would have the strength of 1,000 caddies with just a lift of his hand. Who would be able to stop him? Even if Lu Bu was reborn and Li Yuanba was alive, they wouldn't be able to stop a light punch from him. But since it's a supernatural power of Taoism, why is it called the ox demon and the tiger demon? This supernatural power was originally an ancient supernatural power. It's been lost now. When Li Qingshan heard the word ancient, he became excited. From what he knew, any elixirs, secret manuals, or treasures, as long as they were related to the word ancient, they would be extremely powerful. But Oxen's following explanation disappointed him. The reason why this supernatural power was lost was because it was too difficult to use. It was replaced by other supernatural powers created by the geniuses of later generations. In short, it was eliminated. The ancient sages were indeed powerful, but the later generations might not necessarily be inferior to the predecessors. Moreover, they were standing on the shoulders of the predecessors. The cultivators of the current era value the cultivation of qi and look down on the cultivation of the body. They even refer to the body as a smelly bag. This kind of supernatural power that pursues brute force naturally won't be taken seriously. You don't have to be too disappointed. This supernatural power that I'm teaching you is no longer the original version. It was modified by a powerful figure of the demon race. That's why it's called the ox demon and the tiger demon. The ox demon cultivates the body, while the tiger demon cultivates the bones. As the saying goes, when the Tao rises 1 foot, the devil rises 10. Its power is also much stronger. Are there any drawbacks to cultivating this supernatural power with my human body? I don't know. Because no one has tried it before, I might go berserk and become a demon. Oxen said it casually, but Li Qingshan could only smile bitterly. It was fine if he cultivated an ancient supernatural power that had been lost for a long time. At most, he would become a weirdo and be laughed at by other cultivators. However, cultivating a supernatural power that had been modified by the hands of a demon could turn him into a monster. He might even be slain by the demons. But now was not the time for him to be picky. Li Qingshan thought for a moment and took a deep breath. Brother Ox, please teach me this supernatural power. If someone could understand his desire to change his fate, they would understand that he would accept even the devil's help. Oxen explained the essence of the ox demon's fist of great strength to him in detail. Li Qingshan immediately started practicing. He moved his body and moved his limbs. Under the dazzling sunlight, an old ox and a young man sat in the shade of the trees. The old ox lay down leisurely and gave pointers. The young man's expression was solemn as he listened attentively. Although Oxen could not practice it himself, every word he said would hit the nail on the head. This made Li Qingshan suddenly see the light and gained a deeper understanding of the ox demon's fist of great strength. He practiced with more vigor. Although Oxen spoke carelessly, he was very satisfied with his disciple's comprehension. As expected of a person who had unlocked his innate wisdom. This kind of person would not live in the wilderness for long. It was unfortunate that he was born in a village deep in the mountains. His fate was really not good. He was like a dragon swimming in shallow water and a tiger falling into the plains. Otherwise, he would have stood out in any prosperous city, whether it was in martial arts or literature. He would have become a hero and would not have to suffer the anger of a few foolish villagers. Chapter 6. Oxen had seen many so-called geniuses, each of them gifted with extraordinary talent and godlike luck, but only a few of them were able to achieve anything in the end. On the contrary, many ordinary people who were originally unknown became famous and walked to the peak of the cultivation path. Over the past few years, it had purposefully watched on coldly from the sidelines, allowing Li Qingshan to go through hardships and trials. Only at the crucial moment would it speak up. It was like a master craftsman slowly tempering the material in his hands, all for the sake of forging it into a supreme divine weapon. What ordinary people cared about were external things like talent and luck, but it valued a person's will. If you were someone with a strong will, even if I gave you a great opportunity, would you be able to take it? Just like that, one was willing to teach and the other was willing to learn. Naturally, they improved at lightning speed. In less than 2 hours, Li Qingshan had a general understanding of the ox demon's fist of great strength and vaguely grasped the essence within. Although the ox demon's fist of great strength was a fist scripture, it focused on training the muscles, bones, skin, and flesh to strengthen the body. The fist technique was actually secondary. There were only 3 moves, divided into ox demon butts its horns, ox demon stomps its hooves, and ox demon flexes its hide. They were all the most basic moves of the fist technique, but they could go from simple to complex, giving rise to countless variations. Of course, mastery was one thing, and practice was another. If he wanted to achieve anything, he would need to grind away at it over a long period of time. Li Qingshan had already witnessed the 2 most basic requirements for practicing this ability, alcohol and meat. No matter what technique, it was impossible to create something out of nothing. To make a person powerful, there was a process of conversion, gathering the essence of the sun and moon, and absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. When one's cultivation reached a certain level, they could eat the wind and drink dew, abstain from food, and use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to replace the food of the mortal world. Li Qingshan only had a mortal body, how could he communicate with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? He could not find elixirs or spiritual medicine, so he could only use the most common things to constantly replenish and refine his spiritual energy. Even though Li Qingshan had eaten meat for a few days, his body was still not tough enough. He barely managed to practice the 3 forms once. Sweat poured down his body as he gasped for breath. His stomach growled. By noon, he ate all the wild boar meat as if he had been starving for 3 days. His appetite was even greater than the first time he ate meat. He could not lie down and rest even at noon. Instead, he meditated and nurtured his qi, experiencing the sensation of qi that he did not have. Only when his body had mostly recovered would he practice another set of fist styles. He repeated this several times until evening. Li Qingshan was completely exhausted. He did not even want to move a single finger. 3 shadows sneaked to the front of Li Qingshan's thatched cottage. Li Qingshan heard the noise and walked out of the gatehouse, only to see the 3 ruffians who often hung out with patch-haired Lu. He was afraid that they were here to avenge their big brother. He could not help but secretly complain in his heart. Right now he was exhausted, how could he be their match? Even on a normal day, he could not defeat 3 people. However, he did not expect that when the 3 ruffians saw him, they were like mice seeing a cat. They bowed their heads and begged, "Spare us." This made Li Qingshan stunned, and he asked, "What are you doing here?" Little did he know that Patch-haired Lu's death had left the 3 scoundrels utterly terrified. They were afraid that Patch-haired Lu would not stop even after Li Qingshan had killed him and would come to make trouble for them tonight. As a result, they came to explain themselves reluctantly. All they said was that they had been instigated and ordered around by someone. All of their crimes were because of Patch-haired Lu and Caretaker Lu. Li Qingshan said, "You don't need to say anything, I know all these things." That night, he heard everything very clearly, but of course he could not readily agree to it. The one who killed Patch-haired Lu was him. The 3 ruffians' hearts trembled. When they thought of that night, this fiend was just outside the window, they felt even more terrified. Li Qingshan vaguely understood why these 3 people were so afraid. He remembered that in his previous life, the small town he lived in was once plagued by a murderer. All kinds of rumors were flying everywhere, scaring people to the point that no one dared to go out at night. Thus, he was given this kind of halo of a murderer. Evil people were also divided into different levels. The 3 ruffians were only small evil scoundrels who stole chickens and dogs. In front of a big evil scoundrel, like him, they could only bow their heads and listen obediently. His expression did not change, but his heart was somewhat strange. He had not yet mastered any magical powers, but because of some changes in his mind, his status in the village had undergone a tremendous change. And these changes were all caused by oxen. Perhaps this could be considered turning something rotten into something magical. Li Qingshan did not pay attention to them. He forced himself to practice Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength one more time. This time, there were 3 people present, so he practiced especially attentively. He knew that right now he was only bluffing. If someone found out that he had exhausted all his tricks, the consequences would be unthinkable. The 3 ruffians carefully watched from the side. They had been in the village for so many years, but had never heard of Li Qingshan knowing fist techniques. In the darkness, Li Qingshan's movements were fierce and full of strength. It was obvious that he was not fooling them. They couldn't help but think of what the witch had said. Perhaps Li Qingshan was really possessed by a demon. Seeing that the sky was getting darker and darker, they were so scared that their stomachs cramped. They wanted to leave but couldn't open their mouths. They were afraid that Li Qingshan would suddenly reveal his true form and swallow them whole. After Li Qingshan finished practicing, he ordered, "Follow me." He walked out the door, minding his own business. The 3 ruffians looked at each other and had no choice but to follow behind him. At this time, many villagers were eating in front of the door. Those who were familiar with Li Qingshan carefully greeted him. Those who were not familiar with him hurriedly hid in their houses. Even though it was daytime and they had protected Li Qingshan out of righteous indignation, when faced with this murderer, there was no one who did not feel fear. The 3 ruffians usually hung out with Patch-haired Lu. Patch-haired Lu relied on his fierceness and still had some face in the village. They, on the other hand, were loathed by people and dogs, so they did not have this kind of prestige. For a moment, they forgot their fear and instead felt proud. If they could follow Li Erlang, they would be much more imposing than they were in the past. Some of the elders even sighed. Although Patch-haired Lu was a scourge, they were afraid that an even bigger scourge would be born. At least Patch-haired Lu did not kill anyone, so everyone was not that afraid of him. Li Qingshan also had an almost novel feeling. After walking this road that he had walked countless times, he clearly realized that he was no longer the Li Qingshan of the past. He came to the front of a thatched hut. Thinking about how not long ago he was in poverty and dejection, his heart was filled with emotion. Inside the door, the Li couple were trembling with fear as they pressed against the door. Elder brother Li had a wooden stick in his hand and eldest sister Li had a kitchen knife in her hand. What those ruffians were afraid of, How could they not be afraid? However, they were different from those ruffians. In their hands, they held the money from selling the land. If they gave in to Li Qingshan, they would not be able to keep the money. Therefore, today they did not even do any farm work. They just stayed at home and discussed for the whole day. In the end, it was elder brother Li who made up his mind. He's only one person. Do we have to be afraid of him? If he dares to come, I will help the Li family get rid of this evil creature. But before he could say these tough words for long, he saw Li Qingshan come to the door with 3 people. He was so scared that he immediately hid in the house. Li Qingshan said, "Drag them out for me." The 3 ruffians were intimidated by his power and did not dare to defy him. They were experienced in bullying commoners and shouted as they barged into the house. The Li couple immediately laid down their weapons and surrendered. They did not dare to fight back. They were so scared that their faces were ashen and they trembled. Second brother, what are you doing?" Elder brother Li squeezed out a smile that was uglier than crying. Li Qingshan said, "I'm not here to look for you." He said to eldest sister Li, "Evil bitch, it's fine if you humiliate me, but yesterday you dared to humiliate my parents. Today I will not forgive you." Eldest sister Li was so scared that her legs turned to jelly. She no longer had her usual arrogance. "Little waiter, I was just talking nonsense. I have taken care of you for more than 10 years. We are family." Li Qingshan laughed coldly. "Family? It's fine if you don't want to talk about it. But if you talk about it, there are still debts to be settled. Let's talk about yesterday's nonsense first. What are we going to do about it?" A skinny, monkey-like ruffian said, "There is no need for you to do it. Little brother knows the rules." As he said this, he rolled up his sleeves and slapped eldest sister Li's face. Li Qingshan grabbed the ruffian's hand. Yesterday in the ancestral hall, he really wanted to do this. But today, seeing their trembling faces, he could not bear to do it. After all, these 2 were his own brothers and sisters-in-law. How could he let them be humiliated by such a ruffian? But what must be done, must be done. He had an idea and said to elder brother Li, "Could it be that the people she scolded were not your parents? Don't you know how to teach them a lesson?" Elder brother Li came to his senses. Yes. Afraid that Li Qingshan would not be satisfied, he used all his strength and fiercely slapped eldest sister Li's face several times. Eldest sister Li's face immediately swelled up. On the other hand, Li Qingshan felt that his elder brother looked very satisfied with the beating. He did not know whether it was because he wanted to take the opportunity to take revenge. In any case, his anger had mostly dissipated. He asked, "You said it was family. Let me ask you, where is the money from selling the land?" Eldest sister Li's red and swollen face immediately turned pale. Elder brother Li also lowered his head and did not say anything. The money was their flesh and blood. Li Qingshan was cutting off their flesh. Compared to returning the money, they would rather suffer a beating. Eldest sister Li suddenly became unreasonable. "You can beat me to death. Beat your own sister-in-law to death. Let's see if the authorities will come to arrest you. I don't know what kind of money there is. If you want it, go ask Steward Lu for it." Li Qingshan said sternly, "Do you really think I don't dare to?" This was no longer an act. The murderous aura he had when he killed patch-haired Lu last night seemed to have returned to him through the darkness of the night. The reflection of the blood-stained, wide-eyed youth in the stream had already become one with him. The 3 ruffians on the side felt their bodies go cold. They could not help but take a step back and look at Li Qingshan in fear. Eldest brother Li and his wife were even more frightened. They had never seen such a terrifying person in their lives. It was hard to imagine that the person in front of them was Li Erlang, who they had lived with for more than 10 years. Finally, a bag of silver was handed over to Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan weighed it in his hand and looked at the pale faces of eldest brother Li and his wife. He sighed in his heart. Just for this bit of silver, they had to force their own brother to this extent. He turned around and left. The three ruffians hurriedly followed. Eldest brother Li and his wife were about to hug each other and cry bitterly when the bag of silver slid across the air and landed in front of them with a thud. Chapter 7. Regaining the silver, the Li couple was pleasantly surprised. Madame Li didn't even care about the pain on her face as she hurriedly put the bag of silver into her clothes. The three scoundrels were speechless and showed expressions of admiration. That wasn't a small amount of silver, enough to spend for a long time, but it was thrown on the ground so easily. Looking at Li Qingshan's back, if they had only been afraid before, they now had a lot of respect. Such a good man who could distinguish kindness and grudges was just a story made up by storytellers. They didn't expect to see it with their own eyes. He was already so young, so he would definitely be someone in the future. The contempt they had for Li Qingshan's young age completely disappeared now. Li Qingshan walked in front with large strides. The sun was setting in the west, and the mountains were silent. He felt extremely relaxed and calm, as if he had unloaded an invisible burden. His body was filled with strength, and even his fatigue disappeared. He faintly felt that if he were to practice Ox Demon's fist of great strength now, it would be much smoother than during the day. This wasn't an illusion. Whether it was Taoist supernatural powers or ordinary martial arts, they all had to be in harmony with the mind of the practitioner. Ox Demon's fist of great strength was originally a martial art that was open and closed. It required one's mind to be clear and to advance bravely. Li Qingshan was happy to settle this grudge, and there were no more obstacles in his heart. Naturally, it was in harmony with the essence of the martial art. Back in the hut, Li Qingshan looked at the three scoundrels with bright eyes. Just now, I have to thank you all. If it weren't for these three scoundrels, his brother and sister-in-law wouldn't have given in so easily. If they were to wield a wooden pole and a cleaver, he really wouldn't have been able to do anything. He might even have suffered. He was moved by this, but he didn't expect things to go so smoothly. He also understood the benefits of numbers. Ox Demon King still needed 6 sworn brothers, let alone him. Of course, these three scoundrels weren't fit to be his brothers. The three scoundrels hurriedly said, "Big brother, what are you saying? You are a magnanimous person and didn't bother with us. We can't even thank you enough." Patch-haired Lu didn't know what was good for him and deserved to die. "We followed him and offended him in the past." Li Qingshan waved his hand and interrupted, "Let bygones be bygones." Receiving this promise from him, the three ruffians felt their hearts relax, their thoughts became active, one after another they began to flatter him. When they were talking about their love, they almost wanted to plant grass as incense and become sworn brothers with him. In his previous life, Li Qingshan had never been flattered and praised like this. Even though it came from the mouth of three scoundrels that he looked down on, he couldn't help but feel happy and proud in his heart. However, it was impossible for them to become sworn brothers. After a perfunctory reply, he sent the three of them away. Oxen, who was lying on the side, said, "Why didn't you agree? If they are willing to accept you as their leader, you will be safer in this village. If there is any news, there will be people who will inform you." In a small village, manpower was what mattered most. Most of the time, if a family had more brothers and more sons, other people wouldn't dare to bully them, and they could even bully others. Li Qingshan said boldly, "Even if the people I, Li Qingshan, want to befriend aren't heroes who can roam the world, they are still men of steel who value friendship and righteousness. How can I associate with such people?" His voice was so loud that a few crows were startled and flew up, hovering around the treetops. Oxen was silent. Looking at Li Qingshan's high-spirited appearance, he fell into deep thought. Li Qingshan felt embarrassed and rubbed the back of his head. "Brother Ox, you must laugh at me for boasting, but this is what I think in my heart, and I'm only saying it for you to hear." Out of nowhere, Oxen took out a gourd of wine and tossed it to Li Qingshan. "If you don't even dare to say a few big words, then you might as well go back to farming." What other big words do you have? Tell me. Li Qingshan skillfully removed the cork and raised his head to gulp down a few mouthfuls of wine. He casually wiped his mouth and grinned. I want to travel all over the world, taste all the delicacies in the world, drink all the good wine in the world, cultivate the most powerful divine arts, fight the strongest enemies, and sleep with the most beautiful women. Only then will my life not be in vain. Brother Ox, do you think this dream of mine can come true? Definitely. All right, I'll take your auspicious words. The young man's great dream echoed through the tiny courtyard. Perhaps even he did not take it seriously right now, but a spark had already landed in his heart, about to ignite a prairie fire. Taking advantage of the alcohol, Li Qingshan practiced the 3 forms of the ox demon's fist of great strength again. In his half-drunk state, he had no idea whether his movements were right or wrong. He only swung his fists and kicked as he liked. Meanwhile, Oxen only drank on one side and said nothing. Li Qingshan collapsed on the ground, drunk. The next day, the news of Li Qingshan returning the land money to his brother and sister-in-law spread through the village very quickly through the mouths of the 3 ruffians. Some people were filled with admiration towards his choice, praising him for his extraordinary spirit. There were also people who mocked him. Without land, what would he eat? Wouldn't he still have to work for caretaker Lu? I'd like to see if he still had any spirit by then. However, they were not too bold to say it out loud. Li Erlang's name had already begun to establish itself in the Crouching Ox village. Caretaker Lu was both happy and worried about this. He was obviously happy that Li Erlang would no longer bother with him over this piece of land, but he was worried that Li Erlang was someone who could clearly distinguish between kindness and grudges. Perhaps he was just holding back his hatred right now, only looking for an opportunity to take revenge. After all, patch-haired Lu had been ordered around by him in the past. If Li Erlang came looking for him right now, it would be for the best. He had thousands of ways to deal with him, but he could not be on guard day and night. Sure enough, it was better to bully an old man than to bully a poor young man. Caretaker Lu pondered in the hall. A hunchbacked old man arrived before the gatehouse under the support of a young man, but he was stopped by the guards at the gate. Caretaker Lu immediately went up to receive him. He smiled with his chubby face. Great village head Li, what brings you here? Village head Li said sternly, I don't know when you set up guards here. May I ask what you're guarding against? Caretaker Lu smiled awkwardly. His clan was a landlord, but it was still a small village in the mountains after all. It obviously could not be as well connected as the large clans in the city. There was only an old gatekeeper, so why would there be anyone guarding the gate normally? Although he had done everything he could to annex the land in the village, it was still mostly through legitimate transactions. Even if he bullied people, he would bully those who could not fight back. He did not have that many enemies. The person he had to guard against right now was obviously Li Qingshan. In his eyes, this kid was originally someone who could not fight back, but his reaction in the end had taken him by surprise. The two of them went into the house to talk. Village head Li did not beat around the bush, saying, Caretaker Lu, you're someone who has seen the world. Tell me, how should we deal with this Li Erlang? His eyes were bloodshot. The villagers were afraid of Li Qingshan, and he was afraid too. The older people got, the more afraid they were of death. Last night, he lay on the bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Whenever there was any movement, he would immediately sit up. He was afraid that Li Qingshan would sneak in and take his old life, so he almost did not sleep the whole night. He got up early in the morning and made up his mind that if he did not get rid of this worry in his heart, he would not be able to live, so he came to Caretaker Lu. Caretaker Lu spread his hands and said, How should we deal with him? The villagers all respect him as a good man. Besides, there's no proof that patch-haired Lu was killed by him. How could it not be killed by him? It's almost written on his face, said the young man beside village head Li. He was village head Li's son, Li Hu. He was also a tyrant in the village, but now his prestige was weakened by Li Qingshan, so he was very dissatisfied. Even if it's written on his face, you won't recognize it. Caretaker Lu glared at him. You're just a kid, and you dare to be rude in front of me. He looked at village head Li and softened his tone. Do you know what he did last night? Chapter 8. Steward Lu said, but he has to eat. Lu Hu said, then who doesn't have to eat? As the saying goes, old people become shrewd. Village Chief Li's eyes lit up. You mean? If he wants to eat, he has to work. Who in this village can afford to hire him? If he works under me, we will be at the mercy of us. Steward Lu looked at the admiring expression of Village Chief Li and his son and felt proud. Food is the most important thing for people. Food doesn't fall from the sky, but grows from the ground. Controlling the land is equivalent to controlling the lifeblood of the people. If they don't eat for 3 days, even a strong man will become a soft-footed shrimp. Steward Lu had already thought of a countermeasure. There was no need to kill him. He just needed to knock him down and see what his attitude was. If he could be used, it would not be a bad thing. Li Qingshan woke up from his dream, so he had no idea about these schemes. All he saw was a deer lying in the courtyard. He sniggered, but he did not even thank the black ox. He skinned the deer and cut off its flesh with great familiarity. This time, he had already prepared some salt to marinate the deer's flesh, just in case he would not be able to eat it. After these preparations, he went to the stream to wash his face and rinse his mouth. Then, he began a day of cultivation. For the next few days, he got up before dawn and went to sleep when it was dark. He almost didn't step out of the house and completely cut off contact with the outside world. Every day, he practiced until he was exhausted, but he didn't feel it was hard and boring. He worked hard for his dream. Every step forward, every improvement, seemed to open up a new world in front of him. After more than 10 days, Li Qingshan had just finished eating the musk deer. Village head Li couldn't stand it anymore. He hadn't had a good night's sleep these days. Every night, he had to let his 2 sons stay by his bedside to barely sleep. At his old age, how could he eat and sleep like this? Seeing that he was about to get seriously ill, he quickly came to discuss it with Steward Lu. Steward Lu also waited anxiously. Every day, he sent servants to watch outside Li Qingshan's hut. The first servant reported that Li Qingshan drank and ate meat every day and even practiced martial arts. He didn't believe it at first, but after a few servants said so, no one dared to try again. The theory that the witch was possessed by a demon surfaced in their minds again. Li Qingshan's courtyard seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mystery and terror. In some people's eyes, Li Qingshan's diligent practice of martial arts was to prepare for revenge. Seeing that Village Chief Li was on the verge of tears, Steward Lu furrowed his brows and made up his mind. Invite him to the banquet. If he dares to come, then he's a real man. If he doesn't, then he's just a pretentious coward. An invitation card was delivered into Li Qingshan's hands. He fiddled around with the large, red invitation card. In a small village like this, people would usually invite people for weddings and funerals. Very few people would issue an invitation like this, so he could not help but find it rather novel. He muttered to himself. This was a banquet that would never be good. If he went, he might just be walking into a trap. He had only practiced his supernatural power for about 10 days. Although he had gained a lot, it was still difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. But if he didn't go, then the prestige he had painstakingly built up would go down the drain. When other people mentioned him, Li Qingshan, they would definitely say that he didn't even dare to attend a banquet, which would tarnish his reputation. If he showed weakness now, the attacks would be endless. This move of Steward Lu's was truly a deep scheme, forcing him into a dilemma. Oxen said, "Are you going?" "I just ran out of food." "Since someone is treating me, why not?" "Guan Yunchang is going alone." "Do you think I'm afraid of eating this village wine?" Li Qingshan laughed, his chest full of heroic spirit. "Who is Guan Yunchang?" He's a hero I've heard of. Li Qingshan stood up, gathered his strength in his arms, and used Ox Demon Butts its horns. At the same time, he breathed out, and the faint sound of a cow's mooing came from his lungs. It was as if a large water buffalo was waving its horns, preparing to fight the enemy. Oxen nodded in satisfaction. Li Qingshan's Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength was already at the beginner level. He was improving at a godly speed. If he were to carefully avoid the slightest bit of danger, it would definitely be detrimental to his cultivation. It just so happens that I still have some grudges with someone that I haven't finished cleanly. I can't be too quick about it. This is a good opportunity. Ever since the day Li Qingshan settled his grudge with the Li couple, his Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength had indeed improved a lot. This proved that his guess was not an illusion. Summer was about to end, but the sun was still dazzling. In Steward Lu's courtyard, under the shade of a few elm trees, a table had already been set up. A group of able-bodied men sat at a few square tables. They looked at the wine and dishes on the table and swallowed their saliva. Only Steward Lu's family could afford such a banquet. However, with the craftiness of farmers, they knew that this banquet was not for free. Steward Lu had already explained many things to them. Something about smashing a cup as a signal. In any case, they didn't really understand. They only knew that if Steward Lu turned hostile, they would have to use their fists. Although they weren't too willing to become enemies with Li Qingshan, they were all workers in Steward Lu's fields. They didn't dare to offend this person who provided them with food and drink. In any case, that Li Erlang was only 15 years old. How could he fight against so many people? Therefore, all the workers who could come came, filling up a few large tables. Even if they couldn't bear to do it, they could only go easy on him. They wanted Erlang to kneel and apologize to Steward Lu so that he would suffer less. The cicadas chirped weakly above their heads. Everyone was a little impatient from waiting. They could only look at the good wine and food, but they couldn't eat it. This was quite a test for them. The sound of discussion drowned out the cicadas' chirping. It's about time. He's afraid and doesn't dare to come. Let's hurry up and eat. If it were you, you wouldn't be afraid. It's right that he doesn't come. Only a fool would come. Steward Lu acted as if he didn't hear them. He only smiled slightly and thought, it's good that he knows fear. He's just a kid after all. He's here, he's here. A young worker was sweating profusely. He jogged into the courtyard. Li Erlang is here. Everyone in the courtyard seemed to be strangled at the same time. They couldn't make a sound. The chirping of the cicadas seemed to become louder in an instant. Li Qingshan stood in front of the Lu residence's gate. He was also very nervous. Everything was easier said than done. The Lu residence's green bricks and white walls in front of him was like a small dragon's pool and tiger's den. If he wasn't careful, he might lose his life inside. He wanted to retreat. He thought of the saying, for a gentleman to take revenge, 10 years is not too late. With his current speed of improvement, as long as he was given time, 1 year, no, half a year, or even 3 months, he would be able to master the demon ox fists of great strength, to a certain level. Then, he wouldn't have to be afraid of anyone in this courtyard. He suddenly became spirited. He asked himself, Li Qingshan, oh, Li Qingshan. Could it be that everything you said before was just bullshit? That you only dare to bare your teeth at people weaker than you in this life? Even if you master the unparalleled divine power, you're still just a coward. Chapter 9. The door closed behind him. Li Qingshan looked around and did not seem to notice the tense atmosphere in the courtyard at all. He made his way over to caretaker Lu's table by himself. It faced the hall and was set up under the largest elm tree in the center of the courtyard. It was the main seat, and all the people who sat there were influential figures in the village. To the left and right of caretaker Lu were village head Li and the witch. They were the 3 people with the greatest authority in the village. There were also a few old people in the village. The only young people were village head Li's two sons, Li Qingshan and Li Bao. They were both tall and sturdy, and they stared at Li Qingshan covetously. Caretaker Lu's eyes narrowed slightly. It had only been a dozen or so days, but Li Qingshan seemed to have become a different person. He was unable to describe the exact changes, but in short, he was very different from before. He possessed an additional bearing. Village head Li's face was dignified, and his gaze was hostile. As for the witch, she was completely filled with resentment. If ordinary villagers offended any one of the three, they would not be able to continue living in the village. They could only lower their heads and give in. Not to mention that they had offended all three of them at the same time. However, Li Qingshan would never give in. There were still many rules for eating in the village. From the position to the way they sat, there were many things to pay attention to. Li Qingshan saw how all the other tables were packed, and only this table was relatively free. As a result, he sat down openly and said, "Why aren't you eating? Are you all waiting for me?" No one answered him. Li Hu and Li Bao squeezed over from the left and right, placing their hands on Li Qingshan's shoulders and pressing down hard. Li Qingshan was still young, and he stood tall and straight, no less than the two of them. However, he was skinny, nowhere close to their sturdy waists. In the past, just one of them would have been enough to subdue Li Qingshan easily. Even now, Li Qingshan could only handle one of them at a time. It would be difficult to say if there were two. Li Qingshan frowned and grabbed their wrists, bending them down. At the same time, he used the transformation of ox demon, flexing its hide, like a large water buffalo stretching its muscles and bones, leaning to the left and right. Li Hu and Li Bao only felt a sharp pain in their wrists. After being knocked by Li Qingshan, they immediately lost their balance and fell from their chairs. The two of them flew into a rage out of humiliation. Ignoring the dust all over their bodies, they stood up. Steward Lu originally wanted to say a few polite words to test Li Qingshan's sincerity and see if he had any intention of giving in. He didn't expect Li Hu and Li Bao to be so impulsive. He couldn't care less about scolding them anymore. He was about to smash the cup in his hand and order the workers to do it. Clang! A short knife was nailed to the table. The movements of the few people were also nailed. The blade of the knife shone dimly under the mottled sunlight. Li Hu and Li Bao immediately didn't dare to step forward. They were the sons of the village chief. They were pampered and noble. They could bully good people with their strong bodies, but it wasn't worth it to fight with their lives on the line. Li Qingshan held the short knife in one hand and stepped on the long chair with the other. He leaned forward and looked at Steward Lu with a chuckle. "Steward Lu, this isn't the way to treat a guest. Even if you have any grudges to settle, you might as well wait until you're full. Don't spoil this table full of food and wine." When he said this, he didn't feel nervous anymore. Before Steward Lu could speak, the workers at the surrounding tables all agreed. To them, the most important thing was, of course, eating. If they were to fight, who knew how many dishes and wine would be spilled? They didn't believe that the stingy Steward Lu would prepare another table for them. "That's right, Steward Lu. We haven't eaten this morning. We're so hungry that our chests are sticking to our backs. How can we have the strength to fight? I didn't even eat last night. If I don't eat now, I won't be able to." As he spoke, he gulped down a mouthful of saliva. The tense atmosphere suddenly became a little strange. Even Li Qingshan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He thought to himself that he was actually afraid of this group of people. Steward Lu's face was flushed red. He had set up this banquet to intimidate Li Qingshan. Secondly, he was afraid that the workers wouldn't do their best, so he gave them a certain amount of benefits. He wholeheartedly wanted to imitate what was written in the book, to hide 500 executioners and use the smashing of cups as a signal to rush out and take down Li Qingshan. However, he forgot that his subordinates weren't death warriors or family warriors, but a group of real farmers. Li Qingshan looked at Steward Lu with a smile. What a coincidence. I also didn't eat anything last night, so I won't stand on ceremony now. He grabbed a roasted chicken and started eating. Ever since he started practicing the Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength, his appetite had become extremely shocking. He only took 10 days to finish a 50-kilogram musk deer, and the green ox did not even have the time to catch new prey. A roasted chicken disappeared into his mouth in the blink of an eye. He took the lead, but the workers didn't care anymore. They all picked up their chopsticks and buried their heads in the food. For a moment, only the sound of eating and chewing could be heard in the courtyard. Village Chief Li was angry and afraid. His whole body trembled as he glared at Steward Lu. Aren't you very smart? Quickly think of a way. Steward Lu didn't have any good ideas, so he glared back. If he let the workers do it, and the workers couldn't bear to part with the food in their mouths, what would happen if Li Qingshan pounced on him and stabbed him first? Your two sons usually look fierce, why are they so soft now? At this table, just Steward Lu and the group of old fellows combined wouldn't even be able to withstand a single kick from Li Qingshan. It was as if they were suddenly thrown onto an isolated island. They had no choice but to face the fierce Li Qingshan alone. All of them were trembling with fear. When an ordinary man gets angry, blood splatters 5 steps away. Li Qingshan acted as if there was no one else around him. He picked up the wine pot and poured himself a drink. The village wine was bland to begin with, so drinking it like this was tasteless. He shouted, changed to a bigger bowl. But no one answered. Li Qingshan was displeased. Huh? Steward Lu hurriedly ordered someone to bring a bigger bowl. Li Qingshan filled the bowl and drank it in one gulp. Satisfying. Seeing him drinking so boldly and straightforwardly, the workers also admired his courage. Unexpectedly quite a few of them cheered him on. Li Qingshan had eaten a lot of greasy food these days. When the wine washed over him, he felt extremely refreshed. He didn't stop and drank 3 bowls in a row. When the 3rd bowl of wine went down his stomach, the courtyard was filled with loud cheers. It was as if they weren't invited by Steward Lu, but by Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan burped and cupped his hands. Everyone, eat and drink well. Don't forget about Steward Lu's kindness. Whatever grievances you have, you can settle them after the meal. Anyway, even if you're on your way to the afterlife, you can't be a hungry ghost. Then, he glared at the people at the main table. Why aren't you eating? Now that he was drunk, his killing intent rose. If these people kept looking for trouble, Crouching Ox Village wouldn't be safe. He might even fall into their trap at any time. If he killed a few of them and stole some of their belongings, none of the villagers would dare to stop him. Originally, Li Qingshan had only taken the risk to attend the banquet. He was even bluffing a little. In the end, he saw through Steward Lu and the others bluffing. In an instant, he turned from guest to host. His thoughts were also very different. He couldn't help but think of Uncle Lei Feng's words, difficulties are like springs. If you're weak, they'll be strong. He then thought of what Taizu had said, imperialists are all paper tigers. Yep, the landlord class is also a paper tiger. Although Steward Lu's schemes were a little clumsy, he had read many people. As soon as he saw Li Qingshan's expression, he knew that he was ready to kill. He could no longer maintain his pretense of shrewdness, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. The old people in the village were terrified. They didn't want to die from hunger either. They hurriedly explained to Li Qingshan that they were only doing it for show. They didn't know the inside story at all. Someone stood up, trembling, and wanted to leave. Chapter 10. The elders trembled as they sat back on their chairs. Li Qingshan buried himself in eating and drinking. He had only been eating deer meat for the past few days. He was annoyed by it and wanted to change his diet. The table full of food and wine was swept clean by him. He rubbed his bulging stomach. The people in this courtyard are my elders. Some of them watched me grow up. But there are people who don't care about this and bully me just for a few acres of land. If you don't give me an explanation today, I will give you an explanation. Even if I lose my life, I won't regret it. As Li Qingshan spoke, he pulled out his knife. Steward Lu, village head Li, don't you think so? Steward Lu was determined not to suffer such a loss. He gave in and said, Erlang, if you want to plant those acres of land, you can take it back. Li Qingshan said, I don't want those acres of land. You bought them with money. I don't want to take advantage of you. I just want justice. You can do whatever you want in the village. Don't forget that the gods are watching. Justice exists in people's hearts. As he spoke, his voice became stern. Steward Lu was embarrassed and couldn't say anything. Village head Li reacted, this is our fault. We listened to your brother, that's not my brother. Li Qingshan coldly interrupted. Li De and the others were talking nonsense. They were blinded by lard. That's why they did such a stupid thing. I couldn't sleep for the past few days. I'm afraid that one day when I die, I won't be able to face your parents. Village head Li's voice was full of tears as he spoke. He was thinking about the suffering he had suffered these past few days. Li Qingshan then said to the elders, then tell me, should that piece of land be given to me? Yes, yes. At this moment, no one dared to say no. Li Qingshan got what he wanted. He raised his head and laughed, so there is justice in this world. His laughter suddenly stopped. He lowered his head and his expression changed. Sometimes it was solemn and sometimes it was relieved. There was a hint of indescribable sorrow. He looked at the knife in his hand, so justice is here. He frowned and murmured, there is no God 3 feet above the head, justice is only in the blade. There is no God 3 feet above us, justice is only in the blade. His voice grew louder and louder, shaking the entire room. He was originally indignant and wanted to vent his anger, so much so that he didn't hesitate to kill. At this moment, he felt that it was pointless. He sheathed his saber and no longer paid any attention to the people in the courtyard. He turned around and walked out of the door. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace. The workers ate a free banquet and watched a good show. Satisfied, they dispersed. They were all talking about Li Qingshan, and their faces were full of admiration. Caretaker Lu wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. He knew that if he wanted to gather people to deal with Li Qingshan again, it would be even more difficult. Even though he controlled the land, the workers were not his slaves. They would not listen to his orders. Even if they were slaves, they could still rebel. If he incited all the workers to oppose him, then it would be absolutely terrible. Fortunately, Li Erlang was a person who kept clear tabs on his debts of gratitude and grievances. Since he had said all that today, he would no longer scheme for revenge. He could sleep in peace. Although the banquet was not a success, he had achieved his objective, albeit barely. Village head Li stood up under the support of his 2 sons. Although he was still embarrassed, his expression seemed to have eased up. It seemed like he was thinking the same thing as Caretaker Lu. The 2 of them looked at one another. They both felt embarrassed. Li Hu refused to accept this. Father, why don't we get my elder brother back? With his martial arts, I refuse to believe he can't deal with Li Erlang. Li Bao also said, Uncle Lu, isn't Brother Lu in Qingyang City too? Village head Li just happened to be furious. He said viciously, shut up, all of you. How did I give birth to useless things like you? Caretaker Lu did not reply. They had all been through a lot, so they knew how to play it safe. They would never put themselves in danger for the sake of personal feelings. You bunch of useless people. The gods have already been angered. He doesn't have long to live. The witch who had remained silent the entire time suddenly said mysteriously and viciously. Under the scorching sun, many people could not help but shiver. In this day and age, people revered ghosts and gods, and witches were the people who communicated with the gods. Just now, Li Qingshan had actually said, "There are no gods when you look up." Perhaps he really had angered the gods. Some people even recalled that there had once been a family in the village with a sick child. They asked the witch to treat them, but the witch also said that the child was possessed by a ghost. She burned him with fire and drowned him with water before covering him with blankets in the end. She said she wanted to force the ghost out, but she smothered the child to death instead. The witch only said that this was a request from the king of hell, and no one could save him. However, the adults of the child refused to listen to her. The child's mother even cursed outside the witch's door every single day, which greatly damaged the witch's prestige in the village. However, a few days later, the child's mother suddenly died of illness. She died mysteriously. The witch only said that the child was missing his mother in the underworld. From then on, no one dared to disrespect her anymore. However, Li Qingshan had kicked her in front of everyone and cursed at her a few times. He had already offended her quite badly. "Caretaker Lu, this child is a disaster in your life. Now that the gods have resolved this problem for you," Caretaker Lu hurriedly ordered people to wrap some incense, candles, wine, and meat for the witch. The witch then looked at Village Chief Li. Village Chief Li also gritted his teeth and took out a small piece of silver to send the witch away. A worker carried these things and followed behind the witch. He didn't dare to speak too much until they arrived in front of a brick house. Apart from Caretaker Lu and Village Chief Li, she was the only person in the village who could afford to live in a brick house. There was an incense table and an incense burner in the hall. Smoke curled around it all day long. It was both a residence and a temple. Little N, Grandma is back." The witch suddenly spoke in a hoarse voice. A mysterious smile appeared on her wrinkled face. It was definitely not a benevolent smile. The worker knew that the witch had no children or grandchildren. He was scared witless and hurriedly put down the things. Suddenly, he felt someone tugging at his trousers. When he turned around, there was no one there. He shouted, "Mother," and scrambled out of the room. A shrill laugh came from behind him. "Little N, Grandma is telling you. Someone is bullying Grandma." No one answered in the empty hall. "What? You dare not listen to Grandma?" The witch's face suddenly became ferocious. After a series of insults and curses, she shook a copper bell in her hand. A cold wind suddenly blew in the room. After a long time, the witch regained her gentleness. That's right. Grandma doesn't want to hit you, my good grandson." From beginning to end, she was the only one talking to herself. Li Qingshan returned to the hut. Oxen was nowhere to be found. He probably went to hunt for him again. Taking advantage of the alcohol, he began to practice Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength. He could not be more familiar with the 3 basic stances. His body began to dance on its own. He was still thinking about everything he had experienced today. The thing that looked so scary was actually so weak. If he had run away in front of Caretaker Lu's house, how could he have seen through the secret? In this matter, his true opponent was not Caretaker Lu or Village Chief Li, but the fear in his heart. What was a true expert? The Book of Tao had already given him the answer. Those who defeat others are powerful. Those who defeat themselves are strong. The brave are fearless. When Li Qingshan shouted these 4 words, it was as if he had broken through an invisible barrier. His fist technique suddenly gained an indomitable momentum. No matter what difficulties and obstacles were in front of him, he would break through them. He would never lower his head and never retreat. There is no God above me. I am a god. Justice is not in the hearts of people, but in my hands. His limbs, chest, and abdomen. Every muscle in his body seemed to be connected by this determination. One punch could pass through the strength of his entire body. He had a feeling that even if he did not use a weapon, he would still be able to defeat Li Hu and Li Bao in a direct confrontation. Chapter 11. His courage increased his strength, and his strength in turn increased his courage. The two complemented each other. He practiced all the way until dusk. He actually felt hungry again. He was still very skinny, completely unlike Li Hu and Li Bao, who were plump and strong. Only he knew that the essence of the deer's flesh and blood was not wasted at all. All of it had been integrated into his body. His body seemed to have become a bottomless pit, greedily digesting and absorbing all the wine and meat, transforming it into strands of energy. After practicing, Li Qingshan sat on the ground again. He closed his eyes and calmed his mind, feeling every change in his body. Pulling one's muscles and bones was an extremely painful thing. He still remembered the second day of practicing Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength. He was in so much pain that he couldn't get up. Oxen didn't try to persuade him. He endured the pain and got up to practice. After persisting for more than 10 days, he finally got a little better. No, it should be said that his endurance had become stronger. Logically speaking, after enduring the first few days, his body should have slowly adapted. However, the pain in his body didn't lessen at all. It was as if he had just started practicing every day. Every change in his body was vividly reflected in his mind. It was a pity that he didn't feel the so-called qi. According to Oxen, no matter what kind of magical art it was, as long as one could feel the flow of qi and cultivate a strand of true qi, then one could be considered to have crossed the threshold. However, his time of cultivation was still too short. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strand of coldness at the back of his neck like a gust of cold wind. However, there was no wind at all, and it was even more impossible for there to be a cold wind. Could this be the so-called qi? Li Qingshan was overjoyed. He focused all his attention on the coldness, but he gradually realized that the coldness was slowly invading his skin. It was getting deeper and deeper into his bones and even into his soul. It was extremely cold and made him very uncomfortable. Li Qingshan shook his head and stood up to practice. The cold qi dissipated a little, but as soon as he sat down, it clung to him again. He didn't know what went wrong, so he went to the stream next to the hut to wash his body. The moonlight was bright that night. He looked into the stream and saw a pale-faced child clinging to him expressionlessly. Even though he was quite courageous, he broke out in a cold sweat. This scene immediately reminded him of a movie called The Grudge in his previous life. If Li Qingshan was an ordinary person, he would have been scared out of his wits. However, Li Qingshan had been with the ox demon for a long time. He looked at the child through the stream and saw that the child was no more than 7 or 8 years old and had a dull expression. Li Qingshan asked, "What are you? Why are you lying on me?" However, the child only moved his head. At this time, the water surface rippled, and the reflection of the child disappeared. However, the cold and gloomy aura clearly remained. Li Qingshan tried hard to calm his mind. "I've run into a ghost. I don't know why this little ghost is clinging to me. I can only wait for Brother Ox to come back and discuss it with him. Fortunately, it won't take my life for a while." However, he didn't have much confidence. He only felt fear. The Yin Qi invaded him faster and faster. He hurriedly practiced Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength again. Only then would the cold qi disappear. However, he wasn't a robot that didn't know fatigue. He had to sit down and rest. It was especially hard to bear. Until the middle of the night, when the Yin Qi was the strongest. The cold qi had already invaded half of Li Qingshan's body. He didn't feel any obvious pain, but his limbs gradually became numb and his 5 senses became blurry. An extreme sense of danger stimulated him to use all his brain power. He heard that people had a yang qi in their bodies that could restrain Yin ghosts. He thought that when he practiced the fist, his blood vessels would expand. That was why the little ghost didn't dare to come close. Therefore, when he was meditating, he tried to simulate the feeling of practicing the fist. Closing his eyes, he mobilized his mind and contracted his muscles. It was indeed useful. He barely managed to resist the invasion of the yin qi. He endured like this for an entire night. His mind was sometimes muddled and sometimes clear. He trained his willpower until his willpower was on the verge of collapse. When the rooster crowed, the sky turned white. Li Qingshan suddenly opened his eyes. The sunlight shone on his face through the treetops. It was a little dazzling. The cold qi on his body disappeared. Oxen was looking at him not far away. He looked very interested. Li Qingshan said, "Brother Ox, where did you go? Do you know what I ran into last night? I came back a long time ago. Wasn't it just a little ghost lying on top of you? You just stood there and watched? What else could I do?" Li Qingshan twitched his mouth. He didn't say anything. Oxen had already told him that no matter what danger he was in, he shouldn't expect him to help. He didn't give him the chance to rely on him from the very beginning. He glanced at the yellow gazelle beside Oxen's feet. He couldn't say anything. Oxen had already provided him with the most important help. He couldn't rely on him for everything. Basking in the warm morning sun, Li Qingshan stood up and stretched his body. Luckily the little ghost didn't dare to come out during the day. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have been able to hold on. Brother Ox, I have practiced the supernatural power of Taoism. Can't I deal with a little ghost? If you didn't practice the supernatural power, you wouldn't have survived last night. When you have the strength of one ox, your body will be full of vigor. Naturally, you won't be afraid of this little ghost. Then I don't know how long I have to wait. Other than that, I have another idea. What idea? Ghosts are most afraid of murderous aura and malevolent aura. If you have hundreds of human lives on your hands, you can guarantee that all evil will flee. The little ghost won't dare to come within 10 steps of you. Li Qingshan rolled his eyes. Do you want me to slaughter the entire Crouching Ox village? It's not impossible. What do you think? Do you want to try? Oxen chuckled. Why don't I slaughter you and make steak first? Li Qingshan ignored it. He dealt with the yellow gazelle and finished his breakfast. He put this matter behind him for now. Enduring the exhaustion in his body and mind, he focused on the day's cultivation. However, as soon as he began cultivating, he felt that today was slightly different from usual. There was a thin strand of qi flowing through his body. If he did not concentrate, he definitely would not be able to sense it. The strand of qi was not like the jinqi described in wuxia novels, which was stored in the dantian and circulated along the meridians. Instead, it was flowing everywhere like a fish, swimming between his limbs and bones. When he swung his fists, the strand of qi would flow to his arms and fists, but only for a moment. As soon as he relaxed his mind, the strand of qi would run away. Like a naughty child, it was almost out of his control. He told this situation to Oxen. Oxen was not surprised. Instead, it said meaningfully, "You have to thank that little ghost for being able to sense the existence of qi so quickly. This can be considered a blessing in disguise." At the critical moment of life and death, Li Qingshan mobilized all of his spiritual will to resist the invasion of the yin qi. The little ghost had left, but this spiritual will remained, turning into a strand of jinqi. So this is jinqi. Li Qingshan looked at his palm. What is the use of this jinqi? Chapter 12. Li Qingshan felt that Oxen's words were not entirely truthful, as if he was hiding something. However, in his joy, he had no time to think too much about it. He immediately began to practice and feel the effects of the jinqi. As expected, after a short while, he felt the knack of it. Today, his practice of Ox Demon's Fist of great strength was smoother and easier than it had ever been before. It was like an old machine that had been lubricated, giving him an indescribable sense of joy. Furthermore, the speed at which he could recover his chi was much faster. This seemed like a small matter, but when normal people fought against their enemies, they often didn't dare to attack with all their strength. Because if an attack with all their strength was dodged by the enemy, their body would inevitably stiffen for a moment, leaving behind a huge opening. He didn't have to worry about this. In the time it took for others to throw one punch, he could throw 3 punches with all his strength. Even if they were of equal strength, they still wouldn't be his match. Li Qingshan's heart couldn't help but be overjoyed when he finally got a sliver of results after more than 10 days of hard work. He felt that he was one step closer to his goal. However, when he thought of the dangers and hardships of the previous night, his expression turned cold. "But I do want to know who gave me this blessing." Oxen said in a seemingly casual manner, "There is no door to fortune or disaster. Only people can bring it upon themselves." However, Li Qingshan's heart lit up. These were the words he said when Witch came to ask for the pig's head. The little ghost definitely didn't come to bother him for no reason. After thinking about it carefully, he immediately had some ideas. He was born and raised in this small mountain village, so he knew a little about some of the important things that happened in the village. In this remote little village, there weren't many things that could be considered important to begin with. One of them was a few years ago, when a family in the village broke up due to an illness of a child. Li Qingshan was also a child at the time, so he still recognized the child named Xiao Mao. He never expected that the child would die because of this. It was also because of this example that Li Qingshan obediently returned to his original state after drinking the talisman water. He didn't dare to reveal any of his shocking abilities, and at the same time, he extremely hated Witch. Xiao Mao's mother's death was very strange. She died suddenly in one night, and there was no reason for it. Li Qingshan originally thought that it was because she couldn't bear the pain of losing her son, but now it seemed that she was invaded by Yin Qi. He suddenly stood up, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "So that's how it is. I can't let her go." Oxen said, "Then let's go kill her." "It's not that simple." Li Qingshan sat cross-legged and lowered his head in deep thought. The witch was not someone whom patch-haired Lu could compare with. Not only did she have a lot of prestige in the village, she also had a bit of fame in the surrounding villages. There were often outsiders who came to pray to the witch for divination. If he killed her, he would have no choice but to go far away. He might even report it to the government and be put on a wanted list. Moreover, he had no evidence now, so he couldn't insist that she was the one who did it. Most importantly, since she could order the little demon around, it was still unknown if she had any other tricks up her sleeve. Oxen didn't interrupt from the side, but he was very approving in his heart. If Li Qingshan relied on yesterday's prestige and went to fight and kill the witch in a hot-blooded manner, then it would be a waste of his painstaking efforts. Nothing in this world was perfect. It was hard for brave people to be rash and careless, while intelligent people were often hesitant and lacked a bit of decisiveness and courage. The 4 words, sword, courage and zither heart, were the hardest to come by. Li Qingshan made up his mind and went to the village. "Oh, it's Erlang. Have you eaten? If not, come to my house." At the entrance of the village, an old man was waving a hoe in the vegetable garden. As soon as he saw Li Qingshan, he warmly greeted him. What happened in the Lu family's courtyard yesterday had already spread throughout the village. The originally unknown Li family's Erlang had now become a celebrity in the village. Regardless of age, they all had a bit more respect for this youth. Li Qingshan responded to them one by one. He passed through more than half of the village and came to a small courtyard with a few willow trees planted in front of the door. A small old man in tattered clothes was leaning against the tree. He was drunk early in the morning and had the air of a hermit master. Li Qingshan knew in his heart that this wasn't some hermit master, but an ordinary farmer. He was also Xiao Mao's father. His name was Li Fugue. In reality, he wasn't even 40 years old, but he looked to be in his 50s or 60s. Ever since his wife and son died, he didn't do much farm work. All day long, he drank to drown his sorrows and acted like a lunatic. Seeing Li Qingshan approach, Li Fugui said vaguely, "Come, drink, drink." The stench of alcohol hit him in the face. Li Qingshan frowned. He grabbed Li Fugui and dragged him into the empty room. Without saying anything, he scooped up a ladle of water and poured it into his mouth first, choking Li Fugui to the point of coughing. He leaned against the door and began vomiting. Li Qingshan looked around the thatched house. It was tattered everywhere and spider webs hung all over the window. It could really be called a house with only 4 walls. Li Fugui's family was also famous in the village. The land they owned was second only to Steward Lu's family. He was worthy of the name his parents gave him, and his family lived a happy life. Who would have thought that the world was fickle? An unexpected disaster would lead to such an end. Li Qingshan couldn't help but sigh. The little happiness of mortals was really too fragile. But he was determined and ambitious. He couldn't bear to see people become dispirited and degenerate, so he didn't hold back. Li Fugui said angrily, You, what are you doing? Uncle Li, are you awake? Li Fugui saw Li Qingshan's hostile gaze and shivered. It was not like he was blind or deaf. He knew exactly what Li Qingshan had been doing in the village during the past few days. He was a true malefic. What's the matter? Do you know how Xiao Mao's mother died? Li Qingshan went straight to the point. I don't know anything. Li Fugui was so scared that his face turned pale. He didn't care about anything else and walked out. Li Qingshan grabbed his skinny wrist. Is this how you treat your wife and son? Li Fugui's body froze. Erlang, it's not that I don't want to tell you, but it's trouble that you can't afford to provoke. Don't throw away your life in vain. I don't want to cause trouble, but trouble has already come to me. If I live like you, it's better to throw away my life in vain. You just need to tell me what happened that year. Li Fugui was shocked. What, trouble has already come to me? After hesitating for a while, he let out a long sigh and began to narrate. After Xiao Mao's mother cursed in front of the witch's door, she went home and slept. The next day, she couldn't get up. Her body became cold and blue. That night, many strange things happened, and I also saw what? A child. Li Qingshan was finally sure that the murderer was the witch. Moreover, the witch also told Li Fugui that Xiao Mao not only missed his mother, but also his father in the underworld. Li Fugui was so scared that he gave her a large amount of offerings. Li Qingshan slapped the wall. You've really gone too far. Have you never thought about avenging your wife and son? Li Fugui's face turned red from the contempt in his words. He ran into the room and took out a long package from the bottom of the big wooden box. He opened the package and inside was a knife, a good steel knife. Li Qingshan unsheathed the knife and a cold chill hit him in the face. It reflected on his face and his hair could be seen. The knife's handle was about 1 foot long and slightly curved. It was wrapped in black silk and felt very comfortable in the hand. The knife was about 2 feet long and 4 inches wide. It was much better than the knife in Li Qingshan's hand, which was only 1 foot long and was a poorly made knife. Chapter 13. Li Fugui said, "This is the 100-forged blade I bought from the arsenal of arms in Qingyang City." It was not like he was an idiot. How could the deaths of his wife and son not affect him? He did not resent the witch at all. The blade was proof that he was still a hot-blooded man. However, he was still just a regular farmer at the end of the day. On one side was alcohol, and on the other was a blade. However, he never made up his mind to pick up the blade. Instead, he sank into drunkenness day by day. In the end, he discovered that he did not even have the strength to hold the blade anymore. However, he had always kept the blade. He did not exchange it for a good meal of alcohol. Li Fugui thought about the past and sobbed. I'm afraid to sell this blade, nor can I sell it. If I sell it, I'll have nothing left. Li Qingshan's mind was in turmoil, but his expression did not change. He silently sheathed the blade. If you trust me, then this blade is mine. I'll definitely give you an explanation. Li Fugui turned around and waved his hand. Li Qingshan made his way out of the door. He sped along the way, tempted to go up to the witch and cut her down. He returned to the thatched hut and practiced his fist techniques for a while before calming down. What kind of ability is it to control ghosts? How does it compare to my strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers? The powerful ones can make a myriad of ghosts bow down to them, becoming the ghost emperor of an entire region and making friends with gods and demons. The weak ones can only bully regular people. Not only is there no benefit to practicing it, but it'll even bring harm instead. Yin Qi will invade their bodies, throwing their minds into chaos and making them eccentric. That which obviously belongs to the latter. Li Qingshan stopped worrying. He had been expecting this as well. Otherwise, the witch would not have taken so long to get her revenge after suffering a kick from him for nothing. But you can't underestimate her. You can't see ghosts, but there are many methods that can't be guarded against. Li Qingshan thought of something. Brother Ox, I've heard that if you wipe an ox's tears on your eyes, you can see ghosts. Is that true? Don't even think about it. This old ox has never cried before. Men don't cry easily, but they don't cry until they're heartbroken. Brother Ox, don't you have times when you're heartbroken? Oxen turned his head away and ignored him. Li Qingshan knew that Brother Ox truly had a stubborn temper, so he stopped trying to persuade him. Over the past few days, the two of them had communicated quite a lot. He could vaguely sense the Black Ox's thoughts. He did not want Li Qingshan to rely on him. He wanted to walk his own path, and he had to bear the consequences of his own actions. At dusk, Oxen suddenly handed a small bottle to Li Qingshan. He did not explain anything and made his way out. He made his way up the crouching ox hill and gazed at the myriad mountains under the setting sun. Li Qingshan opened the small bottle and took a look. There was a transparent, light blue liquid inside. His heart skipped a beat, and he smiled resplendently. He thanked the Black Ox before dipping some wormwood into the liquid and carefully dripping it into his eyes. In the beginning, he did not feel anything, but afterwards, he felt his eyes become hotter and hotter, so hot that they swelled. If it were not for the arduous cultivation he had undergone in the past few days, he almost could not help but cry out in pain. In the smoky, tiled house, a group of foreigners who had come to seek divination watched a talisman fly through the air in shock before suddenly bursting into flames. Moreover, it was blue flames. They could not see a pale-faced child holding up the talisman with great difficulty. They only lowered their heads and handed all the money to the witch in fear and trepidation before backing away. The witch stowed the money away carefully. Suddenly, her face twisted. What's going on? Why isn't Lier dead yet? Are you not doing your job diligently? Do you want me to deal with you? Fear appeared on the child's blank, wooden face. He shook his head furiously. The witch suddenly shook the bell in her hand. The child ran around the room in pain, kicking up chilly winds and dispersing the smoke. After quite a while, the witch stopped ringing the bell just now. Good, listen to Granny. Granny won't mistreat you. She handed an embroidery needle that was as thin as a hair to the child. Take it. Stab his eyes blind. The child grasped the embroidery needle with difficulty and flew towards crouching Ox Hill with the night wind. Under the night sky, Li Qingshan continued to meditate in the courtyard with his eyes closed. The child walked over and raised the embroidery needle in his hand, slowly stabbing it towards Li Qingshan's eyes. In the eyes of regular people, there was only a needle flying through the air by itself, let alone the fact that the embroidery needle was extremely thin. Even during the day, it was difficult to see, let alone at night. Li Qingshan sensed something and suddenly opened his eyes. He ignored the embroidery needle that was only inches away from him and stared at the child's pitch-black eyes like a sharp sword. "What do you want to do?" His eyes shone brightly like two balls of fire were burning in them. In the evening, just as Li Qingshan was in unbearable pain, the indistinct aura in his body suddenly began to move, swimming through his eyes. The pain immediately lessened by quite a lot. When the scorching pain vanished, a cool sensation flowed through his eyes, making him feel extremely comfortable. At this moment, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. He opened his eyes and just happened to see the little ghost from last night standing in front of him with the embroidery needle. He was surprised inside and felt some lingering fear. Originally, he thought the witch only had a few tricks up her sleeve, so she definitely would not face him head-on. It was not like the little ghost's Yin Qi could harm him, so he had underestimated her. However, if it were not for the fact that he could suddenly see ghosts, it was likely that he would have been ambushed and had his eyes destroyed. As a result, he would have been better off killing her earlier. The child was even more surprised. Under Li Qingshan's furious glare, he trembled all over, and the embroidery needle in his hand fell to the ground. He drifted far away. Li Qingshan studied the little ghost closely and discovered that he was only around 6 or 7 years old. He was extremely handsome, and if it were not for the fact that his face was ghastly pale, he really did seem like a match made in heaven. He wore silk robes, which must have been his attire when he was still alive. He did not seem like a little ghost that had been driven away, but the young master of a large clan. When the child saw that Li Qingshan could actually see him, he did not dare to move forward. However, he was afraid that he would not be able to complete the task and would be punished by the witch, so he did not dare to leave. Li Qingshan no longer had any fear in his heart. Things that could not be seen were the scariest. Now that he could see it clearly, he discovered that the little ghost was even more afraid than he was. He opened his mouth and asked, "What is your name? Where are you from?" But no matter how he asked, the child did not answer. Li Qingshan's heart moved. "You can't speak." The child hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Li Qingshan thought that the child was only being used by the witch, and that it had unfortunately died at such a young age. Perhaps it was also killed by the witch, so he felt a little pity for the child and his attitude became gentler. "You were so close to me yesterday, why are you hiding now? Come closer, I have something to ask you." The child saw that his expression had become less frightening, and like a timid little beast, he walked a few steps closer. Li Qingshan said, "Since you don't want to speak, then just nod or shake your head to answer. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The child nodded. Chapter 14. Li Qingshan asked many questions, and the child answered all of them as if he didn't know how to lie. He nodded or shook his head, but he could only answer simple questions. If it was a complicated question, he would be stunned. When he was asked his name and where he came from, he would shake his head vigorously. When he was asked what other tricks the witch had up her sleeve, he would just stand there in a daze. Even so, Li Qingshan had figured out many things. The child was indeed killed by the witch and turned into a little ghost for her to control. He was originally able to speak, but after being fed a bowl of medicine by the witch, he couldn't speak anymore. Li Qingshan guessed that the witch kidnapped this child and poisoned him to make him mute in fear that he would speak nonsense on the road. And whenever he mentioned the witch, the child's face would be filled with fear. Li Qingshan said softly, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I'll kill that old witch and set you free." Unknowingly, the child walked closer to Li Qingshan and raised his head. His little face had a more intimate expression. Li Qingshan revealed a comforting smile and wanted to pat his head, but his hand passed through his body and he froze. The child's expression immediately dimmed. He lowered his head and cried silently. Li Qingshan suddenly felt sorrow. He looked up to the sky and let out a long howl. Why were there so many injustices in the world? Wasn't it more cruel than any demon or ghost? The child was startled and looked at Li Qingshan in surprise. Under the moonlight, the determined young man's eyes were actually a little watery. Li Qingshan said in a self-deprecating manner, "Men really don't cry easily. It's just that I haven't been hurt yet. I've made a fool of myself." The child stood on his tiptoes and reached out to touch Li Qingshan's face. He took a tear and carefully held it in his palm, looking a little heavy. "Don't hold it." Li Qingshan's face turned red. He suddenly understood Oxen's dilemma. How could a man's tears be given to others so casually? He also remembered Oxen's words. Weak ghosts had no substance. Only when they cultivated to a certain level could they gradually turn nothingness into reality and pick up solid things. This child was so weak that he could only pick up extremely light things. The child just lowered his head and looked at the transparent liquid in his palm. Li Qingshan was helpless. He looked around and felt a little strange. Why did the sky turn dark so late today? Although the scenery around the hut was a little dim, it was still clearly visible. But when he looked up at the moon, he suddenly understood that it was not that the sky had darkened, but that his eyes had brightened. Not only could he see things in the night, but it was as if a layer of dust had been wiped off the window. Everything felt incomparably clear. Li Qingshan muttered to himself, "Brother Niu is indeed a monster, his tears actually have such a magical effect. It's getting late. I'm going to bed. Because of you, I didn't have a good rest yesterday. I still have things to do tomorrow. I have to rest up." Li Qingshan went back to his room to sleep. The child was squatting in front of the door. Under the moonlight, his figure looked translucent, just like the teardrop in his hand. Li Qingshan slept very soundly and only woke up when the sky was bright. He felt very comfortable. The child had already left. He probably didn't dare to move around during the day. He washed up and casually practiced Ox Demon's fist of great strength. Then, he picked up the thick steel knife he got from Li Fugue. After thinking for a while, he picked up a few pieces of mutton and went out. 3 ruffians were sitting opposite each other with distressed expressions. After Patch-Haired Lu's death, their small group lost their backbone. Their days in the village became even more difficult. They were like rats crossing the street, and everyone wanted to beat them up. They wanted to learn Patch-Haired Lu's rudeness or Li Qingshan's fierceness, but how could they learn? Suddenly, even eating became a problem, let alone eating meat and wine. They could only work as helpers in Steward Lu's house and barely make a living. How could they compare to the carefree life they had before? At this time, Li Qingshan suddenly came. The 3 ruffians hurriedly went to greet him. They saw that his expression was grave and stern. He held a knife in one hand and meat in the other. He naturally exuded a powerful aura. No one dared to look down on him because of his age. The 3 ruffians also softened their voices and praised Li Qingshan's actions the day before. Li Qingshan ignored their flattery and put down the meat in his hand. "There's one more thing I need to trouble you guys with. This meat is your reward, along with a piece from last time." "How could we do that?" "Erlang, just say the word and we'll go through a mountain of blades and a sea of fire." The 3 ruffians said this as they hurriedly caught the mutton. Just like last time, Li Qingshan said, "Follow me." He turned around and left. Only this time, he wasn't bluffing anymore. It was an unquestionable order. The 3 ruffians didn't dare to hesitate and blindly followed behind him. Li Qingshan first borrowed a hoe and shovel from a nearby farmer's house before going to Li Fugue's house. At this time, it was almost noon. The villagers had finished their morning farm work and it was time to pack up and go home for lunch. They saw Li Erlang, who was really famous in the village, bringing 3 ruffians to borrow tools. They didn't know what they were going to do, so they curiously followed behind. This shocked almost all the villagers. When they saw him coming to Li Fugue's house, they thought, is he going to teach that drunkard a lesson this time? How did that drunkard offend him? But in their hearts, they all felt a little ashamed. relying on their numbers to bully a pitiful and impoverished person, and shouting at the village head and steward in the Lu residence were completely different actions. One was not afraid of violence, and the other was bullying the weak. But the three ruffians were very happy. I knew this old drunkard was not a good person. They even patted their chest and volunteered. I'll drag him out now. They hadn't been so proud for a long time. This time, they were going to use Li Fugue to show their power and beat him up in front of everyone. Li Qingshan glared at them and shouted, "Are you coming?" Just when everyone was feeling strange, Li Fugue ran out of the house, gritted his teeth and said, "Coming." He looked surprisingly sober, which made the villagers feel strange. Usually, Li Fugue looked drunk, but they didn't know that after Li Qingshan left, he didn't drink a sip of wine. He thought about it day and night, but they didn't expect that on the next day, Li Qingshan would come looking for him. At this moment, the villagers were even more baffled, and their interest was piqued. Li Qingshan nodded and walked in front with his head held high. He led a group of people to the front of the witch's green brick house. They saw that the door was closed, and obviously, she was alarmed. He ordered the three ruffians, "Break it down." The three ruffians immediately became timid. There was no one in the village who wasn't afraid of this witch. Even when patch-haired Lu was here, they didn't dare to offend her. And this green brick house, which had the function of a temple, was even more mysterious and sacred. They didn't know how many times they had heard about the strange things that happened in this house. When the other villagers saw that he was actually looking for trouble with the witch, they also burst into an uproar. Someone advised, "Erlang, don't mess around." Someone also threatened, "You will suffer retribution for being disrespectful to God." This was an extreme believer in the witch. If it weren't for the fact that he was afraid of the knife in Li Qingshan's hand, he might have come up to reason with him. Without saying a word, Li Qingshan kicked the wooden door open with a bang. The door bar, which was as thick as an arm, broke with a loud sound, shocking the villagers. Li Qingshan turned around and ordered the three ruffians, "Guard outside. Don't let anyone in." The three ruffians braced themselves and answered. At least they didn't need to go in. Li Qingshan crossed the threshold and strode into the courtyard. He came to the door of the central room and was about to kick the door open. The door automatically opened to both sides. It was clearly noon, but it was dark inside the door, and a cold air assaulted his face. The witch was wearing a brightly colored witch robe and sitting on the altar. She said in a strange voice, "Li Erlang, do you know your crimes?" Chapter 15. Witch pointed her finger and a mass of black fog rushed over. Within the fog, one could faintly make out many sinister and pained faces. This was the witch's trump card. It was called Ghost Mist, and it gathered dense energy and resentment. She usually hid it in an urn of ashes and buried it in the ground to absorb energy. She would only use it at crucial moments. Moreover, this ghost fog had no intelligence, only resentment. It was extremely difficult to control and could backfire at any moment. Today, seeing Li Qingshan's ferocious attack, she had hurriedly activated it. However, the power of this ghost fog was also extraordinary. Ordinary beings would immediately fall unconscious after being enveloped by this ghost fog. Most sinister of all was that this ghost fog was like ghosts that existed between reality and illusion. Ordinary people couldn't see it at all. If not for the fact that Li Qingshan had already opened his eyes, he would have fallen for it. The effects of these days of bitter cultivation began to show. His body tilted to the side, avoiding the ghost fog and charging straight at Witch. Witch hadn't expected Li Qingshan to be able to see the ghost fog. She immediately panicked and quickly shook a copper bell. Little Anne. Come out for Grandma and kill him." The child called Little Anne was squatting in the corner, his face full of pain. However, he was holding his head motionlessly. In a flash, Li Qingshan used Demon Ox Stomps the Ground. His foot heavily stomped on the ground, leaving behind a deep footprint. He flew up and slashed down with his saber. There was a flash of cold light and a splatter of blood. Witch's hand that was as thin as a chicken's claw was chopped off along with her wrist by Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan didn't have time to examine the results of his saber strike before he felt Yin Qi attack him from behind. The ghost fog smelled the scent of a living person and was like a beast that had smelled blood. Driven by resentment, it pounced forward. Li Qingshan didn't dare to stop and rushed forward. However, he felt that the ghost fog didn't chase after him. Instead, he heard a mournful scream behind him. Turning around, he saw that the ghost fog had enveloped Witch and the ghost faces were biting and gnawing at her body. Even Li Qingshan hadn't expected this turn of events. It turned out that Witch had lost control of the ghost fog under the intense pain and immediately suffered a backlash. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. In the end, the witch, the instigator of all this, reaped what she sowed. Her entire body twisted as her flesh withered at a visible rate. Li Qingshan was delighted as he watched on. He laughed aloud. Originally, there was a trace of pity and sympathy in his heart, but he suppressed it forcefully because he felt that it was shameful. In the face of the innocent and suffering children, he was willing to sing a long song and shed a tear. Towards such a person who was worse than a beast, he had to erase all of his sympathy and laugh heartily towards the sky. The outer wall of the house was originally filled with people looking into the house. When the villagers became curious, the three ruffians couldn't stop them at all. They could only let them do as they pleased and occupied the best viewing seats at the front door. Seeing Li Qingshan step through the door, he flew up and chopped off Witch's hand. Then, Witch fell to the ground and howled in pain. As she howled in pain, Li Qingshan's laughter was like that of a madman, frightening everyone. Many people were so frightened that they fell off the wall. The three ruffians also fell to the ground with weak legs. Thinking back to how they had mocked and cursed him in the past, they felt incomparable regret. Such a person wasn't someone they could afford to provoke. Li Qingshan saw the ghost fog gradually dissipate. Once the resentment within was released, it stopped. Witch was lying on the ground, on her last breath. She hadn't died yet, but it was clear that she wasn't far from death. He guessed that she must have cultivated some kind of cultivation method to be able to hold on. Witch stretched out her remaining chicken claw towards the child in the corner. She seemed to be pleading and resentful as she called out, "Little N, little Ann." Little N looked at her in a daze and fear. Li Qingshan said, "I'll send you on your way." The thick steel knife in his hand stabbed downwards. Steward Lu and village chief Li rushed over when they heard the news. They didn't even have the time to shout something like, "Spare her life," before Witch died. They looked at each other and broke out in a cold sweat. They remembered that Witch had said arrogantly a few days ago that Li Qingshan didn't have long to live. Today, she had lost her life. They were even more thankful that they didn't force Li Qingshan that day. Otherwise, who knew what the result would be? This was Li Qingshan's second time killing someone. Compared to the first time when he was panicking in the dark, this time in broad daylight, he was very calm. He had improved so much that even he was a little surprised. He thought to himself, could it be that the ox demon's fist of great strength has aroused the demonic nature in my heart? Or is this my true nature? In the modern society of his previous life, many people couldn't express their true nature. They could only go with the flow and live according to the times. Not to mention adults in their 30s or 40s, even youths had lost their passion and ambition. He was just one of the many people, no different from a normal person. But after going through the cycle of life and death, it actually aroused the heroic spirit in his chest. He didn't want to live a mediocre life anymore. But he was suppressed by the hard life in this small mountain village for 15 years. Finally, he had this opportunity. Once his heroic spirit was released, he really was like a crazy demon and refused to restrain himself. Li Qingshan stopped smiling and turned his head to say, "Don't panic, you too. This old woman asked for it. She deserves it. I still need you to uphold justice." You broke into a house and killed someone in broad daylight, and you still want us to uphold justice. These words only swirled in the hearts of the two. Naturally, no one dared to say it out loud. Suddenly, one day, he rushed out of the crowd and came in front of Li Qingshan. He kowtowed 3 times and raised his head. I killed her. It has nothing to do with Erlang. This old witch destroyed my family. Xiao Mao, father has avenged you. After he finished speaking, he cried and laughed. It was Li Fugui. This big stone that had been pressing on his chest for many years was suddenly lifted. He felt that even if he died, he could die in peace. No one in the village knew what happened to Li Fugui. They couldn't help but be silent. Only Steward Lu showed an embarrassed and fearful expression. It was because Li Fugui encountered this accident that he used alcohol to drown his sorrows and sold his family's fertile farmland. That was how he was able to achieve the illustrious name of Half-Village Lu. If Li Qingshan suspected him of colluding with the witch, then wouldn't it be terrible? Li Qingshan said, I will take responsibility for my own actions. I don't need you to take the blame. Please come with me. He called the 3 ruffians and a few prestigious elders in the village to come to the witch's backyard. Li Qingshan turned his head and nodded to the eaves. The others followed his gaze, but there was nothing. Little End was hiding in the shadows, pointing to an empty space. Under Li Qingshan's order, the 3 ruffians began to dig the ground. Under Li Qingshan's gaze, they did their best and didn't dare to be lazy. In a short while, they had dug a big hole and dug out a skeleton. Li Qingshan went down to collect the skeleton. He looked back at the eaves and ordered, continue to dig. This wasn't Little End's skeleton. Under Little End's guidance, Li Qingshan had the people dig in a few more places. A few more skeletons were dug out. The surrounding people were shocked. How could there be so many skeletons buried in the witch's backyard? And every one of them seemed to be the skeleton of a child. Li Qingshan was also shocked. His expression became more and more serious. He knew that these were the victims of the witch's witchcraft. The ghost fog full of resentment he saw must have come from this place. He only hated that the old hag had died so quickly. At this time, there was a ding sound as if they had touched something. They carefully opened it and found a tightly sealed porcelain jar. Without waiting for Li Qingshan to stop them, the 3 ruffians rushed to open the jar. A small cloud of black gas rushed out. As if afraid of sunlight, it went straight into the mouth and nose of one of the ruffians. Chapter 16. The other 2 ruffians were so scared that their faces turned deathly pale. They were unable to move, but the contents of the porcelain jar blinded their eyes. The porcelain jar was filled with sparkling silver. They had never seen so much money in their entire lives. Even Steward Lu and the few old men who were on the verge of death revealed expressions of eagerness. Li Qingshan pushed them away. They were about to fly into a rage. No matter how timid they were, for the sake of wealth, their hearts would beat faster and they would become fierce. However, when they saw that it was Li Qingshan, they didn't dare to make a move. Li Qingshan didn't care about what they were thinking. He took out the porcelain jar and put it to the side. Under the jar, a small skeleton appeared. The flesh and blood on the skeleton had long been stripped away, revealing a grayish-white color. It was unknown how long it had been buried. Little End finally nodded. Li Qingshan sighed softly. He looked around and poured out all the silver in the jar, placing the white skeleton inside. The silver ingots rolled to the ground and formed a small hill. At this moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on it. They didn't even care about the skeleton anymore. Steward Lu was someone who had seen the world. He estimated that there were at least a few hundred taels of silver. Even he would be jealous, let alone the others. In a small mountain village like this, it was really a huge sum of money. Li Qingshan didn't expect that which had collected so much silver over the years. As the saying goes, wealth moves people's hearts. He wasn't an immortal who didn't eat the food of mortals. He was also tempted by this wealth. After all, he would need money for many things in the future. In terms of eating meat, he didn't want to always rely on oxen. Since oxen wanted him, he would show it. He also wanted to change his diet. Perhaps he could go to the market and buy a few jars of good wine. However, he also understood the principle of people die for wealth, and birds die for food. If he took all the silver away, these people would be afraid of his power and wouldn't dare to say anything. However, they would definitely resent him and bury a lot of seeds of disaster. Even the death of which might not be able to appease them. Village chiefly, you are the most respected person in this village. What should we do with the silver? Tell me. Li Qingshan wiped the blood off his thick steel knife and sheathed it. It seemed that he wanted village chiefly to make the decision, but he emphasized the words, highly respected. Not at all. This is all thanks to Erlang. You killed a big scourge in the village. This silver should be handled by you. Village chiefly had played a disgraceful role a few days ago. He felt that Li Qingshan's words were full of threats. He didn't dare to respond. Li Qingshan looked around. The people he looked at all nodded in a hurry. Erlang, you deal with them. Erlang, you handle it. Just now, he nodded slowly. He didn't mind sharing some silver in exchange for peace. However, if anyone really wanted to take charge of his spoils of war, they would have to ask the knife in his hand first. This group of people was much older than Li Qingshan, but they had to listen to the arrangements of a 15-year-old boy. However, no one felt dissatisfied. The current Li Qingshan was no longer the Li Qingshan of the past. The ruthlessness and decisiveness of drawing his knife and killing people had already shocked them. Li Qingshan sat on the ground and distributed the silver. He pressed one hand on the porcelain jar with the white bones and the other on the knife. A group of adults and old people lowered their heads and listened to him. However, the first person to get the silver surprised everyone. Uncle Fugue, the witch destroyed your family. You should have some compensation. Take this silver. In the future, don't drink and drown people. Only then can you comfort the dead. Li Qingshan used the scabbard to poke at the edge of the small mountain of silver and took out some silver. This. How can this be good? Li Fugue didn't expect Li Qingshan to say this. He was at a loss. Take it. Li Qingshan was thanking and praising him for coming forward bravely just now and taking on the responsibility of killing people. Li Fugue gratefully accepted the silver. Li Qingshan called out to the two ruffians. These are for you. He glanced at the dead ruffian on the ground. And him. Go back and give him a proper burial. In the future, make a good living. Don't do dirty things like stealing chickens and dogs. Otherwise, I'm afraid there will be a disaster like this. The two scoundrels were both surprised and overjoyed. They stowed the silver away. When Li Qingshan mentioned their companion, they had both paled slightly, but they did not seem sad at all. Only the heavens knew whether they would specially spend money to bury their companion. Finally, Li Qingshan cupped his fists to Steward Lu, village chiefly, and a group of old people in the village. A few days ago, I offended you. This silver is my apology. I hope you can forgive me for not being sensible. However, if there is anyone who doesn't respect the old and bullies the weak. Although he said this, there was no sign of apology on his face. As he spoke, his tone became even more stern. We won't. These people said repeatedly. Li Qingshan nodded and took out a pile of silver for them to distribute. What about the other people in the village? Village chiefly got his share of the silver and looked at the pile of silver that was left. Since Li Fugue, the victim, could get a share of the compensation, then there were many more victims in the village. It could be said that every family had given an offering to the witch. Li Qingshan glanced at him. Does anyone have any objections? Although he sympathized with the villagers who had been deceived, he didn't plan to pay for their stupidity. If he hadn't killed the witch quickly, these people might have been intimidated by the witch to deal with him. Moreover, it was absolutely unfair to divide the money. In the end, not only would he not get any benefits, but he would also become the target of everyone's resentment. Village chiefly also saw through this, so he came to trip up the youngster who was in the limelight. To put it bluntly, the interests of the villagers had nothing to do with him. Instead, it was the person in front of him who was increasingly threatening his authority in the village. Maybe in a few years, when he really grew up, he wouldn't even be able to keep his position as village chief. However, he didn't expect Li Qingshan to be so meticulous at such a young age. The glance that seemed to see through his thoughts made him even more frightened, and he didn't dare to say anything more. Li Qingshan wrapped up the remaining silver and said, "Then please go and explain to the villagers. If anyone dares to spread rumors and spread it to my ears, The group of people nodded. With the sword and knife in front of them, they had all received benefits, so who would dare to spread rumors? With village chiefly leading the way, he came to the door and explained to the villagers, greatly praising Li Qingshan's demeanor of eliminating evil for the people. Originally, there were still some loyal followers of the witch who were not convinced. However, when the skeletons were carried out one by one, everyone's mouths were shut up. How could a person who had so many skeletons buried in the backyard be a good person? Moreover, who would be willing to offend a strong and ruthless person like Li Qingshan, as well as a group of virtuous and respectable old people for a dead person? Li Qingshan didn't show himself. Instead, he picked up the copper bell in the witch's hand and could faintly feel its spirituality that was different from ordinary utensils. He asked Little Anne, "Is this what she used to control you?" Little Anne nodded and looked at the copper bell nervously. Chapter 17. Little Anne's expression was both happy and confused. Li Qingshan searched through the witch's room again. Little Anne followed behind him like a shadow. Suddenly, he extended his little hand and tugged at his trousers, pointing at a place. Li Qingshan found a secret compartment in the wall. There was a stack of paper inside, all of which were silver notes. He had vaguely heard that this world also had banks, but this was the first time he had seen actual silver notes. Presumably, the witch had buried the silver when she was in her prime. Later on, she grew old and frail, unable to dig anymore. That was why she had exchanged all her loot for light silver notes, storing them in this secret compartment. There were roughly a few hundred taels of silver. She was so rich, yet she had fallen out with him over a pig's head, resulting in her death in the end. And at the very bottom of the secret compartment, Li Qingshan finally found what he was looking for. It was a page of book paper, covered in tiny characters. At a glance, it was a technique for refining souls and controlling ghosts. The edges of the paper were uneven, as if it had been torn out of a book. Li Qingshan practiced the ox demon's fist of great strength and had gained a rudimentary understanding of the path of cultivation, so he was curious about other techniques as well. He never thought the witch's strange technique would only come from a single page of the book. If she had possessed the entire book, he probably would have died here today. However, if the witch had an entire book, she probably would not have holed up in Crouching Ox Village for half her life. The witch was not originally from Crouching Ox Village. She had suddenly settled here several decades ago, and no one knew her origins. Even Li Qingshan had no idea where she had obtained this page of book paper. However, there was a silver note under this page of book paper. It was actually a huge sum of 1,000 taels of silver. This silver note was extremely yellowed, and it was obvious that it had been around for a long time. It was definitely not something she had earned after coming to Crouching Ox Village. The witch's origins became even more mysterious. Li Qingshan asked Little N, "Do you recognize this?" He felt that perhaps it had something to do with Little N's origins. Little N was speechless, neither nodding nor shaking his head. Li Qingshan knew that this was beyond what he could answer. He obviously accepted everything in the secret compartment without hesitation. Just as he was about to walk out the door, he felt little and tugging at his trousers. Li Qingshan looked back and saw him staring at him in confusion, like a lost child. He was indescribably pitiful. His heart softened, and he crouched down. He asked gently, "Don't you have anywhere to go?" Little N nodded. Li Qingshan said, "Then accompany me for now." He opened the jar, knowing that Little N did not dare to walk under the sun. Little N smiled shyly and flew into the jar. Li Qingshan returned to the thatched hut with the jar and buried it behind the thatched hut, creating a small grave. The green ox returned and asked, "Did you succeed?" "She's just an old witch. How hard can it be to deal with?" Then, he showed him the spoils of this trip and showed the page of the book to the green ox. He asked, "Is this also a divine ability? Can I practice it?" This remnant piece of paper is naturally nothing, but this piece of paper came from a supernatural power called the Dark Yin Ghost Control Art. I don't know how it fell into her hands, but cultivating this kind of incomplete thing probably won't bring her any benefits. Haven't you heard of biting off more than you can chew? You should practice the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers first. Oxen glanced at him and revealed the origin of the page. Then, which is stronger, the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers or this Dark Yin Ghost Control technique? If it's the original strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers, then it's hard to say. Although the Dark Yin Ghost Control technique does not focus on self-cultivation, it can gather a large group of ghosts and bully the weak. It's a supernatural power that is good at fighting. If you can't defeat the user in one move, it's easy to get drowned in the sea of ghosts. Then what about the strength of ox and tiger that I practice? Of course it's better. Li Qingshan calmed his mind and no longer hesitated. He put the page away. The other spoils of war were the money. Originally, Li Qingshan thought the black ox would not care about these mundane objects, but he never expected the black ox to say solemnly as soon as he heard that, "All right. Compared to that piece of paper, this is what matters." Disdain for a supernatural power, but attach great importance to money. Even though Li Qingshan had experienced Oxen's education about eating meat and drinking wine, he couldn't help but be surprised. This brother ox was really worldly. Oxen saw through his thoughts. Haven't you heard of the words wealth, companionship, law, and land? These are all necessary conditions for cultivation. Wealth is still the first. Li Qingshan nodded. No matter what I do, I need a financial foundation. If Oxen didn't provide him with food, he wouldn't be able to practice even if he had the secret manual. But I don't think I need to spend too much money. 1,000 taels of silver was a huge sum. If he only used it to buy food and wine, it would be enough to support him for a long time. Oxen said, "You keep asking me how long it will take me to master the ox demon's fist of great strength." Yes, but you won't tell me. I can tell you now. With your current cultivation speed, if there are no accidents, it will probably take you 10 years to master the first layer of the ox demon's fist of great strength and achieve the strength of a bull. 10 years. Li Qingshan's mouth opened wide in shock. And this is the shortest calculation. If you meet a bottleneck, it'll be even harder to say. The stronger the supernatural power, the harder it is to practice. Do you really think Taoist supernatural power is a country bumpkin? Do you think you can master it easily and become invincible? Wake up. As if a bucket of cold water had been poured on Li Qingshan's head, the joy he felt from killing witch was swept away. Then, if I want to completely master the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers, I'll need at least 110 years? He couldn't imagine what he would be like after 110 years. Wrong. The higher the level, the harder it is to practice. It's not surprising if you can't master it in 300 to 500 years. But you don't have to worry too much. Every time you master a layer, your body will strengthen and your lifespan will naturally increase. Then what should I do? Li Qingshan believed that he had extraordinary willpower and persevered in practicing every day. But if he had to persevere for a few hundred years, he would go crazy just thinking about it. Oxen saw that the blow was almost over and made a "brat, now you know how powerful you are" expression. If you want to shorten this time, the easiest way is to rely on the word wealth. Ignoring Li Qingshan's strange expression, a list flew into Li Qingshan's hands. There were dozens of medicinal herbs listed on the list. It's used to make soup and wine. This is a trick that even mortals know. It doesn't matter if there are more or less medicinal herbs in it. The key is that one of them is indispensable. Ginseng. Li Qingshan already saw the medicinal herb at the top of the list. This was probably the most common and easily found spiritual medicine in the world. It was known as the king of herbs and could greatly replenish one's vitality. In Chinese medicine, there was a kind of soul return soup. When a person was about to die, they could recover some of their spirit and make a will. In reality, it was ginseng soup. Chapter 18. Then I don't seem to be any different from an ordinary martial artist. Of course there's a difference. An ordinary person's physique is weak and can't absorb any nourishment. Eating too much ginseng is not only not beneficial, but harmful. I didn't tell you in the beginning because your body is still weak, so it's useless to tell you. These days, you've been slowly recuperating, and you've cultivated a trace of essence qi. Now you've reached the requirement. I was planning to ask you to find a way to raise money. Now you can save some trouble, but I'm afraid the money won't last long. Li Qingshan also understood where the difference was. He could eat more ginseng than an ordinary person, and he didn't have to worry about a nosebleed. His body was like a cauldron, and with the help of divine arts, he could refine and absorb all the essence qi that entered his body, without any waste. This also meant that Li Qingshan had to buy a lot of ginseng, and ginseng was an expensive medicine no matter what era it was. But he had to eat ginseng like a carrot, so no matter how much money he had, it wouldn't be enough. How much ginseng could he buy with the 1,000 taels of silver he had? He couldn't help but ponder this question. After lamenting, Li Qingshan could not help but admit that this was not bad news. The rate at which his strength grew would reach a whole new level. In order to pursue a breakthrough in strength, ordinary people would have to search for rare elixirs, and even if they took them, there might not be any effect. But he only needed to eat the most common and easy-to-get things, and his strength would continue to improve. God knows how many people would be envious of him, so why would he be dissatisfied? As for real money, there would always be a way. With enough strength, why would he be afraid of not having money? This little devil is a bit interesting. Oxen turned behind Li Qingshan, and its round eyes stared at little N, who was hiding behind Li Qingshan. From the beginning to the end, little N had been hiding behind Li Qingshan, and he quietly and curiously looked at Oxen. Little N was so scared that he hid to the other side, not daring to face this talking bull. Although Oxen didn't have any murderous or baleful aura, he instinctively didn't want to get close to him. You mean little Anne? He has nowhere to go now, so I'll look after him for a while. You don't mind, right? Li Qingshan said it casually. If Oxen minded, they would not have said it in front of little Anne. With only that piece of paper, she actually refined a ghost slave, and it is a ghost slave that can drive things. It is really incredible. Either the old woman is a genius in ghost refining, or the little ghost's spiritual quality is somewhat special. However, seeing that the old woman had been refining for so many years and sacrificed so many test subjects, but she had only refined such a ghost slave, it must be the latter. Li Qingshan looked at little Anne. What was so special about him? However, a little ghost was a very strange thing in itself. Oxen said, maybe he is your best trophy. Why don't you take him as a ghost slave? This child may be of great use to you in the future. What ghost slave? He is just a child, and I have promised him to give him freedom. Even in the most difficult time, Li Qingshan was unwilling to go against his heart and sell Oxen for travel expenses. Of course, he was even more unwilling to do so now. Oxen felt that he had said too much and yawned, "That's up to you, but it has lost its master. If no one feeds it, it will not take long for its aura to dissipate, and its soul will fly away and disappear." Soul will fly away and disappear. Little N blinked his eyes in confusion. Ghosts are not poultry and livestock. Do they need to be fed? The dead can't be allowed to live in the world of the living. Even the extremely powerful ghosts can't resist the sunshine, and even a gust of wind can kill them. If no one died and all the ghosts were left in time, it is unknown how many ghosts have been accumulated in the world for thousands of years. What should I do? At dusk, Li Qingshan strode through the mountains and forests with an axe on his shoulder, and a little ghost that seemed to be real wandered around him. Sometimes it ran far to the stream and looked at a fish curiously. Sometimes it flew to the treetops and touched a bird. But without waiting for Li Qingshan to call, it returned to him like the wind and looked at him eagerly. Li Qingshan shook his head and smiled back. For this child, he had a faint sense of responsibility in his heart. But behind them, the bird fell stiffly from the treetops, and the fish floated on the water with its belly turned white, which proved that this was not just an ordinary child, but a dangerous ghost. Li Qingshan searched carefully in the forest, and finally stood in front of a big locust tree that needed more than 10 people to encircle, and waved the axe to chop it. Although he didn't know the axe method or the knife method, the ox demon's vigorous fist contained the most basic and most mysterious method of using force. He could use any weapon freely. Every chop of the axe was powerful and heavy in the same place. Wood chips flew, and the huge tree fell. Li Qingshan didn't care about anything else. He only cut out a small piece of the wood core in the center and brought it to Little N. Little N reached out to touch the small piece of wood core, and his little face showed a comfortable expression. In the end, he simply turned into a gust of wind and went into it. Li Qingshan smiled. This was according to the method taught by oxen. He found an ancient locust tree that was more than 100 years old. The locust tree had the natural effect of gathering spirits, which was very beneficial to spirits. Now that he tried it, it was indeed true. In this way, he didn't have to worry about Little N's soul dispersing. Back to the hut, he sat on the big stone in front of the door and carved the wood core into the shape of a wooden plate. After careful polishing, he carved the word N and wore it on his waist. The yang qi in his body would slowly nourish Little N's soul. He could also use the yin qi in Little N to practice controlling the qi in his body. In the small courtyard, Li Qingshan sat on the ground and kept shouting, "Little N, neck." Little N hugged his neck. Under the stimulation of yin qi, the genuine qi in Li Qingshan's body was mobilized and flowed to his neck. Right arm. Little N quickly changed his direction and hugged his arm. Although his handsome little face was still pale, it was full of a childish and innocent smile, as if it was a very fun game. Until the moon rose, Li Qingshan just now got up, and Little N reluctantly retreated. With the help of Little N, the genuine qi in Li Qingshan's body was tamed a lot, and Little N's eyes were a little more lively, not as dull as they were at first. Li Qingshan thought about it. This was probably not just due to the nourishment of yang qi. No matter how clever a child was, if they were taken away from their parents and watched over, abused, or beaten as they pleased, they would probably become so dull. And when he regained his freedom and life slightly returned to normal, the spiritual qi in his heart began to sprout. Little N looked at Li Qingshan expectantly. Although he still couldn't speak, his eyes clearly said, "Play again." Well, this is not a game. That's all for today. We'll talk about it tomorrow night. Little N nodded obediently. He would never act like a spoiled child, but he couldn't hide his disappointment. Li Qingshan couldn't do anything about it. All right, let's play again. Little N smiled shyly, but immediately pricked up his ears. Chapter 19. Time passed quickly, and autumn arrived in the blink of an eye. The maple leaves in the mountains gradually reddened, and the golden ears of rice became plump bit by bit. An ox cart passed through a small path in the fields slowly. The oxen that pulled the cart had no one to drive it. The ox cart was covered in thick beast hides, and a young man lay on it. He chewed on some straw, resting his head on his arms leisurely as he gazed at the sky. A dagger was tied to one side of his waist, and a wooden tablet hung from the other. He was Li Qingshan. He had over 1,000 taels of silver on him, and he wanted to go to Cypress Stream town that was over 5 kilometers away. In a remote mountain village, spending money was not an easy matter. If he wanted to buy things, he could only go to a larger town. Qingyang City was abundant in resources, but it was too far away, and it definitely would not be cheap. As a result, he could only settle for the next best thing and go to the town. At a fixed time every month, there would be a large gathering in the town. At that time, the people from the nearby villages would all go to the town to conduct various transactions. It was the best time to buy ginseng. And, he had accumulated quite a lot of beast hides, so he could use this opportunity to sell them. Originally, Li Qingshan did not want oxen to pull the cart anymore, but oxen did not mind being a regular ox at all. When he arrived at Cypress Stream town, the sky had just brightened. The town was bustling with horses and carriages as people moved to and fro. Many small peddlers called out their goods loudly. It was a bustling sight. Li Qingshan found an empty space and laid out the beast hides on the prepared sackcloth. However, he did not call out like others. Instead, he sat to one side and meditated. He did not miss any opportunity to cultivate. In his body, the weak stream of qi had already grown a little stronger. He was like a playful child, constantly driving the stream of true qi to flow all over his body. Although he did not move his body, doing this was extremely taxing on his mind. Li Qingshan would open his eyes from time to time and respond to the customers who came to ask about the price. He had a huge sum of money on him, and he did not want to become rich through these beast hides. He only wanted to sell them as soon as possible so that he could buy more ginseng. As a result, he set the price extremely low. Although he refused to bargain with anyone, his business was extremely good. It was almost winter. Li Qingshan had experienced the pain of the bone-chilling wind. All regular people wanted to make a pair of leather boots or a leather jacket. Before long, a large group of people had gathered around his stall. Move! Out of the way! A few young men with bows and arrows on their backs and hunting knives separated the crowd with unfriendly expressions. They surrounded the stall and cast their shadows on Li Qingshan's body, casting Li Qingshan's shadow. Li Qingshan opened his eyes and asked, "What can I do for you?" His eyesight was no longer the same as before. He could tell at a glance that these people were not easy to deal with. Although they weren't very old and didn't have a particularly fierce expression on their faces, they had a sharp murderous aura around them. If Patch-Haired Lu was a barking mangy dog, then they were ferocious mountain guard dogs. Any one of them could easily kill Patch-Haired Lu. A short and vigorous young man with a short beard questioned, "Where did you get these beast skins?" His companions stretched out their hands to play with the beast skins and discovered that it was just as the rumors said. There were no arrow holes or any signs of damage on these beast skins. They were all rare high-quality hides, but they were sold at a much lower price than normal beast skins. If you want to buy, then buy. If not, then leave. Don't block the sun. Li Qingshan was too lazy to make up a lie to explain to strangers. He closed his eyes and continued to cultivate. The surrounding people had already spread out in a circle, but they did not leave. Instead, more and more people gathered. All kinds of discussions could be clearly heard. Aren't these the hunters from Drawn Rain's village? How dare they look down on the people from Drawn Rain's village? How many lives do they have? Drawn Rain's village. Li Qingshan's heart skipped a beat. Even with his lack of knowledge, he had heard about this place like thunder. This was one of the villages around Cypress Stream town, located extremely deep into the myriad mountains. The people who lived in the village were all hunters who hunted for a living, so it was no wonder that they gave off such a bearing. Compared to a farming village like Crouching Ox Village, the people of the Drawn Reins village were much fiercer. They fought against wild beasts in the mountains every day and practiced a few martial arts that had been passed down through generations. Not only did they refuse to obey the rules of Qingyang City, but they never paid taxes either. There had once been people in Qingyang City who had attempted to send troops to conquer this place, but before they had even reached the village, they had run into countless traps and hidden arrows. By the time they reached the village after so much difficulty, they had already lost half of their men. The army's morale was low, so the leading general could only draw the reins in front of the village and flee back to Qingyang City in disgrace. As a result, the original name of the village was forgotten, becoming the Drawn Reins Village. It was possible to imagine just how proud the people of a village that could force an army to return in defeat would be. If a teenager wanted to contend against them, it would undoubtedly be like throwing an egg against a rock. The short young man said furiously, "You can't sell these beast hides here." "Why?" Li Qingshan opened his eyes, and a gleam of light seemed to flash through them. It made the young man think of the vicious beasts in the mountains. His eyes glowed in the darkness, and he raised his guard instinctively. However, he was not afraid. They were hunters who fought against wild beasts. Moreover, when he saw how Li Qingshan was dressed as a farmer, he looked down on him even more. "Because I won't let you sell them." He extended his hand to flip Li Qingshan's stall. A large, coarse hand grabbed the young man's hand like a metal lock. It actually caused him some pain. The young man was surprised. What great strength this guy has. However, his reactions were not slow at all. He threw his left fist directly at Li Qingshan's face. However, his companions showed no intentions of helping out at all. They only watched on coldly from one side. They seemed extremely confident, and some of them even smiled scornfully. Speaking of which, this was the first time Li Qingshan had truly fought with someone. Patch-haired Lu had no strength to fight back in his drunken state, and which had suffered a backlash from the ghost mist. The fist tore through the air, not giving anyone time to think at all. However, this was the effect of many days of cultivation. Li Qingshan subconsciously tilted his head to avoid it. His right foot stepped on the ground, and his body leaned forward. With his spine as the center, all the muscles in his body trembled, and as one, an Iron Mountain Lean smashed towards the young man with great force. Iron Mountain Lean was an extremely common move in fist techniques. Demon Ox's fist of great strength also had it, and it combined 3 of the moves at the same time. Demon Ox stomps on the ground. It stood firmly on its heels and exerted force from the ground. Demon Ox activates its hide. It had a tough body and could not be activated. Demon Ox butts its horns. It used its body as a horn to smash forward. All of its movements were done in one go. Oxen lay in the back and nodded in satisfaction. However, the young man turned pale with fright. It was as if a charging bull had charged at him. He felt a pain in his chest, and was sent flying. He fell into the crowd, and all the muscles and bones in his body felt like they were about to fall apart. The discussions in the surrounding crowd stopped abruptly. The young man's companions were also stunned for a moment, and then they attacked in anger. Li Qingshan's expression became more and more serious. One-on-one and one-on-many were 2 completely different things. Unless the difference in strength was too great, it would be difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. If a strong bull was surrounded by a pack of vicious hunting dogs, it would only end up with pieces of flesh torn off and dying. Chapter 20. This was probably not just the power of that sliver of Jinqi, but also the miraculous effect of Oxen's tears. He ducked and dodged a punch. Ox demon butts its horns. His fist struck out and knocked down another young hunter. But at the same time, a hunter had already circled behind him and punched fiercely at Li Qingshan's back. The other two young hunters grabbed Li Qingshan's waist, one on the left and one on the right, and slammed him to the ground. They spent their days hunting in the mountains and were well versed in encirclement techniques. They were definitely not boorish men who fought on the streets. Even though Li Qingshan could defeat any one of them, he was instantly at a disadvantage. Seeing that it was too late to block, Li Qingshan focused all of his mental thoughts on his back. That sliver of Jinqi flowed with his heart. The muscles on his back twisted together, and a small bulge could be faintly seen. A heavy punch landed on Li Qingshan's back, but it was like hitting tough leather. All of the power dissipated as that bulge of muscle flattened. Other than a tremble from Li Qingshan's body, there was nothing else out of the ordinary. At the same time, the two hunters who had grabbed Li Qingshan's waist felt as if Li Qingshan's body was rooted to the ground. They could not move him at all. The three of them had used up all of their strength, and their momentum immediately weakened. Li Qingshan, who had suffered 3 heavy blows, had already recovered his breath. With a roar, his elbows dropped down. The ox demon butts its horns in ox demon's fist of great strength emphasized that, other than the fists and feet, the entire body could be used as horns. Elbows were the most powerful horns. The two hunters felt a sharp pain in their backs. They wanted to vomit blood and lay on the ground involuntarily. Li Qingshan suddenly turned around and pounced at the hunter who had ambushed him from behind. He punched him in the chest and knocked him to the ground. The surrounding people were dazzled by what they saw. They only saw that the young man, who was at a disadvantage, beat the 5 men of the Drawn Rains village to the ground in just a few moves. They were all astonished. Li Qingshan looked at the 5 hunters who were groaning in pain on the ground, and then looked at his own hands. It was as if he could not believe that he had done this. His strength had unknowingly reached this level. But before he could rejoice, a large group of hunters suddenly rushed out with their hunting bows and knives drawn. They surrounded Li Qingshan with fierce eyes. For this gathering in Cypress Creek Town, the Drawn Rains village did not just send a few people. There were more than 20 of them, and they brought the entire village's accumulated fur goods. Just now, those few young hunters were just juniors who had followed their elders to see the world. Seeing that they couldn't sell their goods, and hearing that someone was selling animal hides for cheap, they all rushed over together to find trouble with Li Qingshan. However, he didn't expect that Li Qingshan would be taught a lesson instead of looking for trouble. Naturally, the elders would not sit idly by and do nothing. They quickly reacted and surrounded Li Qingshan. The dozen or so hunting bows were drawn, and the aura that exploded in an instant made him feel like a trapped beast that had fallen into a trap. His life and death were in the hands of others, and he actually felt a sense of despair. Compared to this, the feast at Hung Men, at Steward Lu's house was like playing house. His mind was also as tense as a bowstring. He suddenly recognized the other party's identity. They were hunters for a living. Their expertise was not in their fists, but in the hunting bows in their hands. His ox demon forges its hide could block fists, but it definitely could not block sharp bows and arrows. At this critical juncture, he calmly pulled out the thick steel knife at his waist. His eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for a way to escape. He didn't expect that selling animal hides would also cause such a disaster. Although he was unwilling, he might have to kill someone in the middle of the town and carve out a path of blood. "Did you do this?" A strong man with a sickly face and a large bow on his back stood in the middle of the hunters and asked in a loud voice. Li Qingshan replied, "I did it." The man studied Li Qingshan in some surprise. If regular people saw this, their limbs would become weak from fright, yet this kid was so young, yet he was so calm. Just his mental fortitude was far greater than all the juniors in the village. He asked the short hunter that Li Qingshan had sent flying with the Iron Mountain Lean, "Xiao He, what's going on?" "Hunting chief, this kid has probably ruined our business." Xiao He struggled to his feet. The crowd fell into an uproar. "Isn't the hunting chief of the Drawn Rains village?" "It's Huang Bingu." The so-called hunting chief was equivalent to the village head, but it was different from Crouching Ox Village, where old people held power. Those who could become hunting chief in the Drawn Reins village were all the strongest men in the village. They were in charge of all matters related to hunting in the village. As for Huang Binggu, he was the current hunting chief of the Drawn Reins village. He was a renowned figure, and Li Qingshan had heard of him a long time ago as well. However, he had never thought it would be the sickly man before him. He finally understood the origins of the name, sickly tiger. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Li Qingshan obviously felt a heavy pressure inside, but he was no longer the Li Qingshan of the past. He sneered, "You came to ruin my business without saying anything, and now you're slandering me, saying that I've ruined your business. The Drawn Reins village really is tyrannical." Huang Binggu's face sank. He yelled, "Why don't you get up? You can't even defeat a single person in a group, yet you still have the face to lie on the ground and cry out in pain. Are you still worthy of being men of the Drawn Reins village?" Li Qingshan knew he had not gone easy on them, but under Huang Binggu's order, the 5 young hunters actually managed to stand up by themselves. Apart from their sturdy bodies, they felt great reverence towards Huang Binggu. Huang Binggu raised his hand, and all the hunters put away their sabers and bows. "We were in the wrong in this matter, but brat, you shouldn't have been so heavy-handed. If I hadn't been heavy-handed, the one lying here right now would be mine. It's rare for us to go down the mountain to sell furs. The daily necessities of the entire village depend on it. It's fine if you sell according to the market price, but this method of selling is messing up the market price, greatly harming us." Li Qingshan was silent. This was something he had not expected at the start. Naturally, he could say that it was his business how he sold it, but with Huang Binggu's reputation, he had admitted that he was in the wrong in front of everyone, and had spoken with reason and evidence. He had not used his numbers to oppress him, so he was not willing to argue and pester him endlessly. If the other party really wanted to kill him, he would not just sit and wait for death. Huang Binggu said, "I'll buy all of these furs." A hunter came forward to pay the money and put away all the furs. The people in the surroundings all clicked their tongues in praise of Huang Binggu's loyalty. Li Qingshan was rather surprised. He glanced at the bag of money handed to him. "There's no need." He turned around and tidied up the ox cart. He did not rely on these furs to make a living in the first place. The other party was so generous, so if he haggled over every ounce, he would instead be looked down upon. The admiration in Huang Binggu's eyes deepened. He watched as Li Qingshan disappeared into the crowd and said to the people around him, "I like this kid. Does anyone know his origins?" A farmer said carefully, "He seems to be Li Erlang of the Crouching Ox village." Many people in the surroundings had actually heard of him before. They all said, "No wonder.